The stagecoach rattled into Dust Creek like a death rattle, all violence and dust, wheels screaming against stones that had seen 1,000 arrivals and forgotten them all. September heat pressed down on the valley like a boot on a throat, merciless and absolute. The horses frothed, their flanks slick with sweat and fear from the mountain pass. Driver Tom Hutchins spit tobacco into the dirt and yanked the brake with the weary efficiency of a man who'd stopped expecting anything good from the world. Caleb Vance stood 30 feet back from the station platform, arms crossed, jaw set like granite. 34 years old and already weathered beyond his years, he wore the high country the way other men wore scars, permanent, deep, unmistakable. His hat brim threw shadow across eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Around him, the town gathered like vultures to a carcass, pretending they weren't watching, pretending they had other business at the mercantile, the smithy, the saloon. They were all watching. They'd been watching for weeks, ever since word spread that Caleb Vance, the man who'd buried one wife and sworn off softness, had sent east for another. "Fool's errand," Mayor Preston had pronounced over whiskey. "Man like that, broken the way he is, he'll chew her up and spit her out before winter." "If she even shows," Martha Henley had added, her voice acid with something that might have been concern or might have been satisfaction. What kind of woman answers an ad like that? The kind who's desperate, they'd agreed, the kind who's got nowhere else to go. The stagecoach door remained closed. Caleb's hands flexed once, twice. His ranch foreman, Red Sullivan, stood beside him, a grizzled man whose loyalty ran deeper than blood, but whose faith in this endeavor ran shallow as spring melt. "Still time to call it off," Red muttered, low enough the town wouldn't hear. "Just say the word. We'll tell Hutchins she missed the coach. No shame in it." "I gave my word." "Your word was to a letter. Letters ain't people. Letters don't come with complications." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's here." That's the end of it. But even as he said it, doubt crawled through his chest like frost through a dying tree. What had he been thinking? A mail order arrangement, cold, practical, spelled out in ink like a business contract. He'd been explicit in his advertisement. Seeking capable woman for partnership on working ranch. Must be strong, practical, unconcerned with luxury. No romance, no illusions, survival only. Her response had been equally direct. "I meet your requirements. I arrive September 12th. 1-month trial as discussed. If either party finds the arrangement unsuitable, I depart with no obligation. No flowery language. No promises. Just terms, clean and sharp as a signed deed." He told himself it was perfect. He told himself he wanted exactly that. Someone who understood the bargain, who wouldn't expect what he couldn't give. Someone who'd see the ranch for what it was. Brutal work, long silence, and a future measured in survival, not dreams. The stagecoach door opened. Time fractured. The woman who emerged wasn't what Caleb had imagined. Wasn't what anyone had imagined. She stepped down with precise, measured grace. Not the hesitant shuffle of someone uncertain. Not the desperate lunge of someone fleeing. Her boots touched dirt like she was claiming territory. She was beautiful. The thought hit him like a fist to the sternum. Unwelcome and absolute. Not pretty. Beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made men stupid, that started wars and burned cities. Dark hair pulled back in a severe knot that somehow made her features sharper, more dangerous. High cheekbones, full mouth, skin that hadn't yet been beaten pale by frontier sun. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Dark, direct, absolutely fearless. She looked at Dust Creek the way a general surveys a battlefield, cataloging, assessing, already 3 moves ahead. The town's whispers started immediately, a rustle like wind through dead leaves. Lord have mercy. That's her? She won't last a week. Look at those hands, never worked a day in her life. Lena Cross, because that's who she was, though Caleb didn't know it yet, not really, ignored them all. Her gaze swept the platform, the storefronts, the clustered townspeople, and dismissed them as irrelevant. Then her eyes found Caleb. She didn't smile, didn't soften, just looked at him with the same assessing directness she'd given everything else. "Mr. Vance?" Not a question, a statement. He stepped forward, hat in hand, because some reflex of manners still lived in him despite everything. "Miss Cross?" Mrs. Cross? Her voice was clear, controlled, with an Eastern clip that would have sounded foreign anywhere, but seemed especially alien here, where words came slow and careful. I'm widowed. The letter should have mentioned it. It had. He'd barely registered it, one line among many. Now it hit different, seeing her in the flesh. Widowed meant she'd been married. Widowed meant she'd lost someone. Widowed meant she understood, maybe, what it felt like to have the future carved out from under you. Or maybe it meant nothing at all. My condolences, he said, because that's what you said. Unnecessary. It was 3 years ago. She turned to Hutchins. My trunk, please. The large one. Hutchins, who'd driven this route for 15 years and considered himself beyond surprise, fumbled with the luggage like a green boy. The trunk he hauled down was battered, but quality. The kind of thing that had seen better days but was built to last. Not the cheap carpet bag of someone with nothing. Not the pristine luggage of someone playing at frontier life, something in between. Caleb reached for it. I have it. Lena's hand closed on the handle. Not aggressive, not proving anything, just handling her own affairs. The wagon, I assume? He gestured to where Red waited with the buckboard, suddenly feeling like a fool standing there empty-handed while she hefted her own trunk. Red, bless him, moved to help without being asked, and Lena accepted with a nod that acknowledged the assistance without making it about weakness. The town watched every second. Mayor Preston emerged from the mercantile, thumbs hooked in his vest, performing casual interest while his eyes cataloged everything. Welcome to Dust Creek, Mrs. Cross. I'm Mayor Preston. On behalf of the town, I hope you'll find our community. Thank you. Lena cut him off with surgical precision, not rude, but absolutely final. Mr. Vance, shall we? Caleb found himself moving toward the wagon before he'd consciously decided to, some part of him responding to the command in her voice that expected to be obeyed. Red shot him a look that said, "What the hell just happened?" but stayed silent. The ride to the ranch was 7 miles of mountain road, winding through pine and scrub, climbing toward the high valley where Caleb had carved out his piece of the world. Usually, he made the trip in comfortable silence, alone with his thoughts and the creak of the wagon. Now, with Lena Cross beside him and Red following on horseback, the quiet felt different. Heavier. Expectant. She didn't fill it with nervous chatter, didn't ask questions. Just watched the landscape roll past with that same assessing gaze, reading the land like text. 5 miles in, she spoke. Water rights? He blinked. What? Water rights. For the ranch. You have access to the creek through the North Valley, but there's drought damage on the eastern slope. Either your access is limited or someone's diverting upstream. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. She'd been here 20 minutes, and she'd spotted what he'd been wrestling with for 2 seasons. Hale Cattle Company holds the upper reach. They've been aggressive about their claims. How aggressive? Aggressive enough. She turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town. The advertisement said survival only. I assumed that meant the land. Should I have assumed it meant other threats as well? He should have lied. Should have softened it, given himself time to ease her into the reality of what she'd signed up for. Instead, he told the truth. Victor Hale wants this valley. All of it. He's been buying out the small ranchers one by one, offering generous terms to those who sell, making life hell for those who don't. I don't intend to sell. Which means he's making your life hell. Some. Define some. Cattle go missing, fences get cut, hands quit without explanation. Creek access gets disputed. Nothing you can prove, nothing you can take to the law, which is a joke anyway, since Sheriff Morrison owes his position to Hale's backing. Lena nodded once, processing. How many other small ranchers are left? 4, including me. The Hendersons to the south, old couple, hanging on by their teeth. The Murphy brothers west, stubborn but struggling. And Jacob Chen east, run sheep, which makes him even more of a target. Why? Cattle barons hate sheep. Claim they ruin the grazing land. Mostly, they hate competition. So we're outnumbered, undersupported, and facing an enemy with legal and financial advantages. Caleb almost smiled at the we. Almost. That about sums it up? Good. He turned sharply. Good? I prefer clear terms. Ambiguity wastes time. She looked back at the landscape. The advertisement promised 1 month to prove suitability. I assume that applies in both directions. You'll be evaluating me. I'll be evaluating the situation. At the end of 30 days, either party can walk away. That's the agreement. Then let's be clear about the test. I'm not here to play house or pretend at ranch work. If I stay, it's because I'm genuinely useful. If I leave, it's because this situation is genuinely untenable. Mutual assessment, honest result. And if it's untenable? She met his eyes. Then I'll leave, and you'll find someone else or manage alone. But I don't fail tests, Mr. Vance. I either pass or I walk away before the grade is final. I've never been fond of losing. The ranch came into view around the next bend. 2,000 acres of high valley grassland, a sturdy timber house, barn, bunkhouse, and corrals spread across the benchland where the creek ran clear and cold. It was beautiful in its way, brutal and honest, the kind of place that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you alive. Lena studied it in silence as they approached. Red rode ahead to open the gate, and Caleb guided the wagon through into the yard. 3 ranch hands emerged from the barn: young Danny Mitchell, barely 19, old Tom Freeman, who'd been working cattle longer than Caleb had been alive, and Carlos Ruiz, the best bronc rider in the territory. They all stopped dead when they saw Lena. Caleb set the brake and climbed down, then offered his hand to help her. She took it, brief, impersonal contact, and stepped down. Boys, this is Mrs. Cross. She'll be staying on for a trial period. Mrs. Cross, my hands, Danny, Tom, Carlos. Danny snatched his hat off, face going red. Tom nodded with the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned not to assume. Carlos smiled slow and easy. Welcome, Senora. It's been a long time since this place saw a woman's touch. I'm not here to provide a woman's touch, Lena said, not unkindly, but absolutely clear. I'm here to work. Where can I start? The men exchanged glances. Well, Tom said carefully, usually the house... Is the house in disarray? No, ma'am. Caleb keeps it. Then it doesn't need immediate attention. What about the ranch operations? What needs doing that isn't getting done? Silence. The kind that comes when people realize they've misjudged a situation completely. Red cleared his throat. Books are a mess. Caleb handles them, but he's got about 12 other jobs and the accounting falls behind. We're 3 weeks late tallying the supply expenses, and we've got no clear record of the cattle count from spring. Lena turned to Caleb. Do you have a ledger system? Of sorts. May I see it? He led her into the house, a solid structure, well-built but spare, the kind of place built for function over comfort. The main room held a stone fireplace, a heavy table, simple chairs. Through doorways she could glimpse a kitchen, a bedroom, a second room used for storage. Caleb gestured to a desk in the corner, piled with papers, receipts, tally marks on scraps, a ledger book that hadn't been updated in weeks. It's not pretty. Lena circled the desk like a predator circling prey. She picked up a receipt, scanned it, set it down. Picked up another. Opened the ledger, flipped through pages, closed it. This isn't a system. This is chaos disguised as record keeping. I know it's behind. Behind suggests there's a process being followed slowly. This is absence of process. You're tracking expenses on random paper, recording sales in the ledger sometimes, estimating cattle counts instead of maintaining actual records, and I'd wager your understanding of profit margin is more instinct than calculation. Caleb's jaw set. It's worked well enough. Has it? You said Hale is buying out your neighbors. How do you know your operation is viable enough to survive even without external pressure? How do you know where you're losing money? How do you make strategic decisions about herd size, feed purchase, land improvement? I know my ranch. Knowing and proving are different things. Knowledge lives in your head. Proof lives on paper. When Hale challenges your water rights or disputes your land boundaries or claims you're operating at a loss to justify a buyout, your knowledge means nothing. Documentation means everything. The truth of it hit like a slap. She'd been here less than an hour, and she'd already put her finger on the wound he'd been ignoring for 2 years. The slow bleed of disorganization that he kept telling himself didn't matter because he knew the ranch, knew every acre, every head of cattle, every dollar spent and earned. But she was right. Knowledge in his head died with him. Proof on paper outlasted them all. How long to fix it? He asked. To organize what exists? 3 days? To implement an actual system going forward? Ongoing, but the framework can be in place by week's end. That fast? I was a bookkeeper, Mr. Vance, before I was married, during my marriage, and after my husband died. I managed accounts for a shipping company in Philadelphia. 300 employees, international contracts, complex inventories. Your ranch, by comparison, is straightforward. Cattle, supplies, land, labor. 4 categories. Child's play. She said it without arrogance, just fact. And somehow that made it more devastating, the casual competence, the absolute certainty that this thing he'd been struggling with was simple to her. Why'd you leave? The question came out before he could stop it. Philadelphia. Bookkeeping work that pays well. Why come here? Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a door closing. That's not relevant to the trial period. Seems relevant to me. Woman with your skills could work anywhere. Why answer an ad for a hardscrabble ranch in the middle of nowhere? I had my reasons. I'd like to know them. And I'd like to maintain some privacy. We agreed to a professional arrangement, not an interrogation. She moved past him toward the desk. I'll need full access to all records, receipts, contracts, correspondence, everything. Also a clear understanding of your current financial obligations, outstanding debts, and expected income through year's end. That's personal. That's operational. If I'm evaluating whether this situation is tenable, I need complete information. You can trust me with it, or you can't. But if you can't, we're wasting each other's time. Caleb stared at her, this woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach an hour ago and was already demanding his secrets, already reorganizing his life, already making him feel like a stranger in his own home. He should have been angry, should have felt invaded, overstepped, diminished. Instead, he felt something else, something dangerous, hope. Fine, he said. You'll have access to everything, but the deal goes both ways. You want my trust? I get honesty in return. You're running from something. I can see it. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Lena's jaw tightened fractionally. I'm not running. I'm choosing. What's the difference? Running means you're still controlled by what's behind you. Choosing means you've decided what's ahead matters more. She held his gaze. I chose to answer your advertisement. I chose to come here. I chose to offer a fair trial. What I left behind is left behind. It doesn't control me, and it won't affect my work here. That's all you need to know. It wasn't all he needed to know. It wasn't even close. But pushing would break something fragile that was forming between them. Not trust exactly, but the potential for it. So he nodded. Fair enough. For now. Thank you. She turned back to the desk, already cataloging, already organizing. I'll start immediately. Where do you take meals? Here, at the table. And the hands? Bunkhouse has a kitchen. They manage their own meals mostly. That's inefficient. 5 separate cooking efforts instead of one coordinated system. I'll discuss it with them. If they're willing to coordinate, we can reduce supply costs and time waste. They might not, then they won't. But I'll offer the option. Men are practical creatures. Show them efficiency and most will embrace it. She spoke like someone who'd managed men before, spoken to them, negotiated with them, understood how to frame suggestions as opportunities rather than demands. Caleb found himself wondering again. Who had she been in Philadelphia? What life had she left behind? But he'd agreed not to push. So he left her to the desk and went back outside, where Red was waiting with barely controlled curiosity. Well? Red demanded. Red. What's the verdict? She's staying. 1-month trial, as planned. Caleb, she's... Red stopped, struggling for words. She's not what you advertised for. She's exactly what I advertised for. Capable, practical, unconcerned with luxury. That ain't what I mean, and you know it. She's... Red gestured helplessly toward the house. She's gonna complicate things. She's gonna organize the books. That's what I'm afraid of. Woman starts organizing the books. Next thing you know, she's organizing everything else. Your schedule, your habits, your whole damn life. And you... Red pointed at him. You're already letting her. I hired her to help run the ranch. Running includes organizing. You hired her to be practical and uncomplicated. That woman is about as uncomplicated as a lightning storm. Caleb couldn't argue. Wouldn't. Because Red was right. Lena Cross was dangerous in ways he hadn't anticipated. Ways that had nothing to do with beauty or attraction or any of the simple fears he'd thought he was guarding against. She was dangerous because she was competent, because she saw clearly, because she asked the right questions and didn't accept easy answers, because in 1 hour she'd made him feel like maybe, possibly, things could be different than they'd been. And that was the most dangerous thing of all, hope, creeping back in through cracks he'd thought sealed shut. 1 month, Caleb said firmly. At the end of it, either it works or it doesn't. Simple as that. Red snorted. Nothing about this is going to be simple, boss. Mark my words. The first 3 days passed in a blur of activity that left the entire ranch off balance. Lena attacked the books with systematic precision, spreading paperwork across the main table, creating separate piles for different categories, transferring information into the ledger with neat, efficient handwriting. She worked from dawn until late evening, breaking only for meals that she prepared with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. Simple, filling food that appeared on time without fuss. On the morning of the 4th day, she announced the results over breakfast. "You're operating at a 12% profit margin," she said, sliding a single sheet of paper across to Caleb. "That's dangerously thin. 1 bad season, 1 major loss, 1 unexpected expense, and you're in the red." Caleb studied the figures, clean columns, clear calculations, numbers that matched his instincts, but seeing them stark on paper made them more real. "How do I improve it?" 3 ways. Reduce costs, increase income, or both. I've identified several areas where you're hemorrhaging money unnecessarily. She flipped the page over, revealing more calculations. You're buying feed from Thompson's Supply in Dust Creek. They're charging 15% above market rate. There's a supplier in Silver Falls, 40 miles further, but their prices are competitive and they deliver in bulk. Switch suppliers, negotiate a seasonal contract, save 8% on feed costs immediately. Thompson's been reliable. Thompson's been convenient. Reliability and convenience aren't the same thing. Has he ever missed a delivery? No. Has the Silver Falls supplier? I don't know, never used them. I sent inquiries. They've been in business 12 years, serviced 20 ranches in the region, missed 4 deliveries total, all weather-related, all with advance notice. Their reliability is documented. Thompson's is assumed. She moved to the next item. You're selling cattle at auction 3 times a year. The spring sale makes sense. After winter, before summer grazing. The fall sale makes sense. Before winter feeding costs escalate. The midsummer sale loses you money every time. How? Prices are lowest in midsummer when everyone's selling to avoid peak grazing costs. You're following the crowd instead of anticipating it. Hold your midsummer cattle through to fall, accept slightly higher feeding costs, sell when prices peak again. Net gain, 6% on those head. Caleb leaned back, processing. Every point she made was logical, backed by numbers, hard to argue with. What else? Your water situation. Hale's diversion is costing you approximately 18% of your potential grazing capacity on the eastern slope. That's not just lost grass, it's lost cattle weight, lost sale value, compounding across every head you run. You need to resolve it. I've tried. Legal disputes take time and money. Then don't fight it legally. Fight it practically. Meaning there are water rights and then there are water realities. Hale controls the upper reach through legal claim, but water flows downhill. If you can capture it before it reaches his diversion, through seasonal ponds, irrigation ditches, whatever means necessary, the water's yours by physical possession. Let him challenge that legally while you use it practically. It was bold, possibly illegal, definitely the kind of thing that would escalate tensions with Hale. It was also exactly the kind of thinking Caleb had been too cautious to attempt. "That'll start a war," he said. "You're already at war, you're just fighting defensively. Defense loses slowly, offense creates options." Red, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. "She's not wrong, Caleb. We've been playing Hale's game, letting him set the terms. Maybe it's time we set some of our own." Caleb looked between them. His foreman, who'd been with him through everything, and this woman who'd been here 4 days and was already proposing they upend the strategy he'd followed for 2 years. I'll think about it, he said. Lena nodded, accepting the non-commitment without pushing. There's more. Your hands are underutilized. They work dawn to dusk. They work, yes, but they're not specialized. Everyone does everything, which means nothing gets done expertly. Danny's good with horses. I've watched him. But you've got him mending fence half the time. Carlos can track like nobody's business, but he's hauling supplies. Tom knows cattle better than anyone, but he's splitting time between that and general labor. We rotate jobs to cover what needs doing, which means you're paying expert wages for general labor. Specialize them. Let Danny handle all horse-related work, training, breeding, shoeing, health. Pay him for that expertise and stop wasting it on fence work. Let Carlos manage territory patrols and cattle tracking. He'll spot trouble before it becomes crisis. Let Tom focus purely on herd management and training the others in cattle knowledge. Hire a general laborer for the grunt work at lower wages. That's 4 people instead of 3. That's 3 experts and 1 laborer producing more than 4 generalists. I ran the numbers. Even with an additional wage, productivity gains offset the cost within 6 months. Caleb's head was spinning. 4 days. She'd been here 4 days and she was proposing restructuring his entire operation, renegotiating his suppliers, escalating his conflict with Hale, and hiring additional labor. And every single suggestion made sense. You said you'd need 3 days to organize what existed, he said slowly. Seems you did a bit more than that. I evaluated while I organized. Pattern recognition is part of bookkeeping. You see the numbers, you see the patterns, you see the inefficiencies. Your ranch isn't failing, Mr. Vance, but it's not thriving either. It's surviving, barely, while slowly bleeding value. You can continue that way and hope circumstances improve, or you can make strategic changes and force improvement. Force how? We're still outnumbered by Hale, still operating on thin margins. Margins I can improve by 12 to 15% within 6 months through the changes I've outlined. That gives you breathing room, resources to fight with. Right now, you're one disaster away from ruin. What I'm proposing is building a buffer, financial resilience that lets you weather storms and push back against pressure. She stood, gathering her papers. But it's your decision. I'm here to evaluate and advise. Implementation is your choice. I'll be checking the Eastern Slope water situation this afternoon. Permission to take a horse? Caleb blinked at the subject change. You ride? I do many things, Mr. Vance. Assuming I can't do them wastes both our time. May I take a horse? Danny'll saddle one for you? I can saddle my own horse. I just need to know which ones are available. The bay mare. Gentle enough, sure-footed on the mountain trails. Lena's expression suggested what she thought of gentle enough, but she didn't argue. Thank you. I'll return by evening. She left, taking her papers, her certainty, and Caleb's equilibrium with her. Red whistled low. Well, she's something. That's one word for it. You gonna take her advice? I don't know, maybe. Some of it makes sense. All of it makes sense, and you know it. Question is whether you're ready to stop playing it safe and start playing to win. Caleb looked at his foreman. Since when do you want to escalate with Hale? Since I watched what he did to the Hendersons. Since I saw the fear in Jacob Chen's eyes when his flock got spooked right off a cliff. Since I realized we're going to lose anyway if we keep doing what we're doing. At least this way, we lose swinging. Or we win. Or we win, Red agreed, but only if we're willing to risk it. But Lena returned as the sun touched the western peaks. The bay mare lathered, but not blown. She'd ridden hard, but she'd ridden smart. The horse was tired, not exhausted. Danny took the mare with an approving look that suggested Lena had earned some respect in his eyes. She found Caleb in the barn, checking a lame gelding's hoof. The Eastern Slope, she said without preamble. There's a natural depression about 2 miles up where snowmelt collects in spring. It's dry now, but the ground's clay-heavy, good water retention if it's deepened and properly bermed. Create a seasonal pond there, and you capture runoff before it reaches Hale's diversion. It won't solve everything, but it'll recover maybe 60% of what you're losing. Caleb set the gelding's hoof down carefully. How much work? 2 weeks with 4 men and a scraper. Less if you hire additional labor. The investment pays for itself in recovered grazing value within 1 season. And when Hale notices? He'll notice immediately. His riders patrol that slope. The question is what he does about it. That's what worries me. Lena leaned against the stall door, studying him. May I speak plainly? You haven't been? A ghost of a smile touched her mouth, the first he'd seen. Plainer than this. You're afraid. Caleb stiffened. I'm cautious. You're afraid. Not of hard work, not of risk itself. You're afraid of loss, of investing, trying, building something, and having it taken away. Again. The word hung in the air between them. Again. She knew. She'd guessed, or Red had told her, or she'd simply seen it in him the way she seemed to see everything else. My wife died in childbirth, he said, voice flat, 3 years ago. I'd built this place for her, for the family we'd planned. When she died, it stopped meaning what it had meant, became just a place. Work. Survival. And now you're surviving, but not living. Maintaining, but not building. You're afraid that if you invest, emotionally, financially, strategically, you'll lose it again and won't survive a second time. Wouldn't you be? I was, Lena said quietly. My husband died suddenly. Heart gave out, doctors said. One moment he was fine, next moment he was gone. We'd built a life together, not perfect, but ours. When he died, I understood your fear. The terror of caring about anything, because caring makes you vulnerable to loss. How'd you get past it? I didn't. I chose through it. Fear doesn't disappear, Mr. Vance. You just decide whether it gets to make your choices for you. I could have stayed in Philadelphia, worked my bookkeeping job, kept my head down, never risked anything again, safe, numb, slow death of the spirit. She pushed off the stall door. Or I could choose something harder, riskier, alive. I could come to a place where nothing's guaranteed, where I might fail spectacularly, where I might find out I'm not as capable as I think, but at least I'd be choosing. At least I'd be alive. And if you lose, then I lose having tried. That's different than losing by default. She met his eyes. You're going to lose this ranch eventually if you keep playing it safe. Hale's patient, but he's relentless. He'll outlast you, grind you down, wait for one bad season or one moment of weakness. Your caution isn't protecting you, it's killing you slowly. The truth of it burned. He'd known it, somewhere deep, but hearing it spoken aloud made it undeniable. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop evaluating whether I belong here and start planning how to keep this place alive. I'm suggesting that if we're doing this trial period honestly, we treat it like we're actually trying to succeed rather than waiting to fail. I'm suggesting boldness. By building a pond and hoping Hale doesn't retaliate? By building a pond and being ready when he does? By improving margins so you can afford to fight? By specializing your labor so you're operating efficiently? By making this ranch valuable enough, successful enough, visible enough, that when Hale comes at you, and he will, you're not standing alone. The other ranchers are where you are. Scared, isolated, slowly losing. What if you weren't? What if you showed them it's possible to push back and win? What if you became the example instead of another victim? It was audacious, possibly crazy, definitely dangerous. It was also exactly what Sarah would have wanted. His wife, the woman who'd believed they could build something beautiful in this harsh land, who'd face down every challenge with stubborn faith that love and work could conquer anything. She died before seeing it proven, but her spirit had been this same boldness, this same refusal to accept defeat. Maybe that's what Lena reminded him of. Not Sarah herself, they were different in 100 ways. But that same fierce determination, that same willingness to look at impossible odds and say, prove it. 1 month trial, he said slowly. You want to spend it proving we can succeed? I want to spend it actually trying to succeed. If we fail, we fail. But I won't fail because we were too afraid to try. Caleb extended his hand. Deal. 1 month. We try your way. Improved margins, specialized labor, the pond, all of it. At the end, we evaluate honestly. But if Hale escalates, if this goes bad, then we deal with it together. She took his hand, her grip firm and sure. I don't run from fights, Mr. Vance. I finish them. Her hand was warm in his, smaller but no less strong. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb felt something besides grief and duty. He felt ready. The war was coming, had been coming, but now, maybe, he had a chance at winning it. The pond took 11 days instead of 2 weeks. Lena had miscalculated in their favor, not the labor required, but the determination of men given clear purpose and competent leadership. Danny, Carlos, and Tom threw themselves into the work with an intensity that surprised even Red. And when Jacob Chen rode over on the 5th day to see what the commotion was about, he stayed to help. Hale's men have been watching, Jacob said, wiping sweat from his brow as they took a water break. He was a compact man in his 50s, weathered and wary, with the permanent tension of someone who'd learned threats came without warning. 3 riders on the ridge yesterday. They didn't approach, just watched. Lena looked up from where she was calculating berm measurements. Let them watch. They'll report back to Hale that we're improving our land. That's not illegal. Neither is burning down barns, apparently, Jacob said bitterly. Not when you own the sheriff. Did you lose a barn? 2 years ago. Lightning strike, Morrison ruled, except there'd been no storm that night, and 3 of my sheepdogs died of poisoned meat the week before. Jacob's jaw worked. I know what I know, but knowing and proving are different things. Lena met Caleb's eyes across the work site. Knowledge and proof. She'd said the same thing about his ranch records. The pattern was clear. Hale operated in the shadows, creating plausible deniability while systematically destroying anyone who opposed him. Then we need to start building proof, she said. Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses, incidents. Create a record. To what end? Jacob's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd stopped believing in justice. Morrison won't act. The territorial marshal is 300 miles away and has bigger problems. Hale owns half the county and has his fingers in the other half. Records don't matter when the system's rigged. Records always matter. Maybe not today, maybe not this month. But systems change. Officials change. Public opinion changes. When it does, documentation becomes evidence. Evidence becomes power. Jacob studied her with new interest. You sound like someone who's fought this kind of fight before. I've seen corruption. I've seen how it operates, and I've seen it fall. It always falls eventually. The question is whether it falls before or after it destroys everyone in its path. Lena stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. We make it fall before. How? By refusing to be destroyed quietly, by building alliances, by making ourselves too visible, too organized, too legitimate to eliminate without consequences. Carlos, who'd been listening while checking the scraper blade, spoke up. She's right. Hale's power comes from keeping everyone isolated, afraid, fighting alone. He picks us off one by one because we let him. What if we didn't? You saying we should form some kind of... Jacob trailed off, the idea too big to articulate. An association, Lena finished. Ranchers and farmers, united for mutual protection and collective bargaining. Pool resources. Share labor during crisis, document incidents, present a unified front. Hale would see that as a declaration of war, Tom said. He already declared war, Caleb said quietly. All eyes turned to him. We've just been pretending we're at peace. Maybe it's time we acknowledged reality and fought back smart instead of just bleeding slowly. Red nodded slowly. The Hendersons, the Murphys, Jacob, us, that's 5 operations. Small, but not nothing. If we coordinate. We become harder to isolate, Lena said. Harder to intimidate. And if we document everything, keep meticulous records of every incident, every threat, every suspicious occurrence, we build a case. Maybe not for Morrison, but for someone. Federal authorities, territorial government, even public opinion. Hale's power depends on secrecy. We make everything visible. Jacob was silent for a long moment, turning it over. Finally, he said, I'll talk to the Hendersons and the Murphys. See if they're willing to meet. Here, Caleb said. 1 week from today. Bring everyone who's willing to listen. After Jacob left, the work continued with new energy, purpose sharpening every shovel thrust and scraper pass. The pond took shape, a wide depression with carefully sloped sides, bermed earth packed hard to hold spring runoff. It wouldn't fill until the snow melted, but the structure was sound, the positioning perfect to capture water before gravity carried it down to Hale's diversion. On the 11th day, as they finished the final berm, riders appeared on the eastern ridge, 5 of them, sitting their horses in a line against the sky like a tribunal. too far to identify, close enough to make their presence felt. Watching, judging, threatening. Danny's hand drifted toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Boss?" "Easy," Caleb said. "They're just looking. For now." "They're cataloging," Lena corrected, shading her eyes to study the riders. "Measuring our numbers, our capabilities, our defenses, reporting back to Hale about what we've built and how to destroy it." Comforting thought. Better than ignorance. If they're watching, it means we've gotten their attention. If we have their attention, we matter. She turned to face the riders fully, made a deliberate show of studying them in return. "And if we matter, we have leverage." One of the riders, the center one, larger than the others, raised a hand in mock salute. Even at this distance, the gesture carried menace. Then they turned as one and disappeared beyond the ridge. "That'll be Garrett," Red said grimly. "Hale's foreman, mean as a snake and twice as venomous. If he's personally scouting us, Hale's taking this serious." "Good," Lena said. "Let him take it serious. Let him worry. Let him wonder what we're planning next." "What are we planning next?" Carlos asked. Lena smiled, sharp and predatory. "We're going to make ourselves legitimate, documented, and impossible to ignore. Starting with a complete territorial survey of our water rights and land boundaries, filed with the county and territorial offices, followed by formal incorporation as a ranching cooperative, legally registered. Then we're going to document every head of cattle, every acre of land, every asset we control. Make it all official, all recorded, all public." "That's a lot of paperwork," Tom observed. "Paperwork is armor. The more official we are, the harder we are to disappear quietly. Hale can burn down a barn and call it lightning. He can't burn down a legally incorporated entity with territorial registration without federal attention." Caleb felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, but its precursor. Possibility. For 3 years he'd been reacting, defending, surviving. Now watching Lena transform defensive survival into strategic offense, he felt the terrain shift beneath him. This was what leadership looked like. Not his cautious stewardship, not his grim determination to hold what he had. This was bold, calculated, 3 moves ahead, thinking that turned weakness into strength and isolation into alliance. "You've done this before," he said. "Built something against opposition." Lena's expression flickered, something old and painful crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "I've seen it done. Watch someone fight city corruption with nothing but documentation and stubbornness. It worked then. It'll work now." "Who?" Caleb pressed. "Your husband?" "My father." The words came reluctantly, pulled from somewhere deep. "He was a union organizer, fought factory owners who thought workers were disposable. He taught me that power respects organization and documentation. Respect force when necessary, but always prefer intelligence." She turned away from the ridge where the riders had disappeared. "He was killed for it. Accident, they ruled. Everyone knew better. But there was no proof, no evidence, just convenient timing and convenient conclusions." The pain in her voice was old but unhealed, a wound that time had scarred over without truly closing. Caleb understood that kind of pain, the loss that never quite finished, the injustice that never quite resolved. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry. Be determined." He lost because he fought alone, because he trusted the system to care about truth more than power. "I won't make that mistake. When we fight Hale, we fight smart. We build proof, allies, legitimacy. And we don't stop until he's finished." The meeting 1 week later brought together an odd collection of frontier survivors. The Hendersons, weathered and weary but still standing. The Murphy brothers, young and angry and tired of retreating. Jacob Chen, cautious but hopeful. And Caleb's operation, newly organized and dangerously competent under Lena's systematic management. They gathered in Caleb's main room, around the heavy table that suddenly seemed too small for the weight of what they were attempting. Lena had prepared documents, simple agreements outlining mutual aid, shared documentation, and collective response to threats. "We're not forming an army," she explained, addressing the group with the calm authority of someone accustomed to running meetings. "We're forming a cooperative association, Legal, documented, designed for mutual protection and resource sharing. Martha Henderson, a tiny woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much hardship, spoke up. What's to stop Hale from just crushing us anyway? He's got money, men, the sheriff in his pocket. He has those things, Lena agreed. But he also has vulnerabilities. His power depends on appearing legitimate, on maintaining the fiction that he's just a successful businessman making fair deals in a free market. The moment that fiction cracks, his position weakens. How do we crack it? Patrick Murphy asked. He was the older brother, late 20s, with his younger brother Sean sitting beside him radiating barely controlled fury. By making him act openly, by forcing him to reveal his methods, by documenting everything so thoroughly that eventually someone with actual authority can't ignore the pattern. Lena spread papers across the table. Every incident, no matter how small, dates, witnesses, details, we're building a case. Against a rigged system, Sean Murphy said bitterly. Morrison won't touch Hale. The mayor's in his pocket. The territorial marshal doesn't care about small ranchers. Not yet, Lena interrupted. But territorial marshals care about organized crime, about interstate commerce disruption, about federal land rights violations. Hale might own local authorities, but he doesn't own the federal government. We just need to build a case large enough, documented well enough, that it demands federal attention. That could take years, Jacob said. It might, or it might take months if Hale gets desperate and makes mistakes. Either way, we're building something bigger than immediate victory. We're building a foundation, organizational structure, legal legitimacy, documented evidence. Every day we exist, we get stronger. Every day Hale has to work around us instead of through us, he gets weaker. Thomas Henderson, Martha's husband, leaned forward. What's the cost? Joining this association, I mean. We don't have much. No money, Lena said firmly. We pool labor when someone faces crisis. We share information about incidents, threats, suspicious activity. We coordinate documentation and legal filings. We present a united front when dealing with suppliers, buyers, authorities. But no one pays into some central fund. This isn't about money. It's about mutual survival. The room was quiet, everyone weighing risks against potential benefits. Finally, Martha spoke. We've been dying slow for 2 years. Lost half our herd to rustlers Morrison couldn't catch. Lost our water rights to a legal challenge we couldn't afford to fight. Lost our son when he got run out of the territory by men who made it clear he wasn't welcome. Her voice hardened. Slow death or risky rebellion? I'll take rebellion. I'm in, Patrick Murphy said immediately. Sean nodded fierce agreement. Jacob sighed. I've got nothing left to lose. My flocks are half what they were, my land's being squeezed, and I'm one bad season from selling out anyway. Might as well go down fighting. One by one, they signed Lena's document. Simple, clear, committing them to mutual aid and documented resistance. When it was done, they had 5 operations, 12 adults, and a combined territory of over 8,000 acres standing together against Hale's empire. It was small. It was fragile. It was also more than Hale had faced before. First order of business, Lena said, sliding another document forward. Complete inventory of assets filed with territorial authorities, cattle count, land boundaries, water rights, equipment, everything documented and officially recorded. Hale can't claim we're operating illegally or failing financially if we have current certified documentation. Second, she continued, we establish a communication system. Something happens to one of us. Everyone knows within hours. No more isolated incidents. No more picking us off one by one without response. How? Jacob asked. We're spread across 30 miles of mountain territory. Signal fires, simple, visible from ridge points. 1 fire means general meeting needed. 2 fires means immediate danger. Everyone responds. 3 fires means federal emergency. Send for territorial marshal. It was primitive but effective. The valley's topography meant ridge points were visible from multiple locations. A signal fire could spread information faster than any rider. Third, Lena said, and now her voice took on steel. We stop operating from fear. We make improvements, file claims, expand operations. We act like we own this valley because we do. Legal, documented, legitimate ownership. Hale wants it. He can try to buy it at fair market price, or he can watch us thrive despite him. He won't just watch, Thomas warned. He'll escalate. Let him. Every escalation gets documented. Every threat, every incident, every suspicious occurrence goes into our records. We're building a pattern of harassment and intimidation. Eventually, that pattern becomes evidence. Evidence becomes legal action. Legal action becomes his downfall. It sounded so simple the way she said it, so logical, so inevitable. But Caleb could see the doubt on the faces around the table. Doubt born of too many losses, too much betrayal, too many times believing things could get better, only to have hope crushed. "I know you're scared," Lena said quietly. "I know you've been beaten down. I know the system has failed you and authorities have ignored you, and you have every reason to believe this won't work. But the alternative is surrender. Slow death or quick ruin. Those are your options if you stand alone. Together?" She let the word hang. "Together we have a chance. Maybe a small one. Maybe a desperate one. But a chance." Martha Henderson reached across and gripped her husband's hand. "We're in, all the way." The others nodded, grim, determined, still afraid but choosing courage anyway. Caleb felt pride surge through him, unexpected and powerful. This woman, who'd stepped off a stagecoach 2 weeks ago with one trunk and no guarantees, had just organized a resistance movement, had taken broken, isolated victims and transformed them into allies with purpose and structure. After the others left, after Red had walked the Hendersons to their wagon and Danny had helped Jacob saddle his horse, Caleb found Lena at the desk, updating records with their new alliance documented in neat columns. "That was remarkable," he said. She didn't look up. "That was necessary. Remarkable would be if it works." "You believe it will?" "I believe we have better odds together than apart. The rest depends on Hale's response and our discipline in maintaining documentation." She set down her pen. "You should know, what I'm proposing will make things harder before they get better. Hale will see this association as a direct threat. He'll escalate." "How bad?" "Bad enough that people might get hurt. Property might get destroyed. Some of our group might lose their nerve and break away. We might fail completely." She met his eyes. "But we might also win. And winning means everything. Freedom, security, a future worth building. Is it worth the risk?" Caleb thought of Sarah, who'd believed anything worth having was worth fighting for. Thought of the ranch she'd dreamed of turning into something beautiful, something lasting. Thought of 3 years spent surviving instead of living, maintaining instead of building. "Yes," he said, "it's worth it." Lena nodded, something like relief crossing her face. "Good. Because the hard part starts now." She was right. Hale's response came 3 days later, delivered not through violence but through law, or its corruption. Sheriff Morrison arrived with papers claiming a boundary dispute, asserting that Caleb's eastern slope, the same land where they'd built the pond, was actually part of Hale's territorial claim based on a survey from 1872. That survey was disputed and overturned in 1875, Lena said calmly, producing documentation from her impeccably organized files. "The Territorial Land Office has the updated boundaries on record. Our pond is well within legal limits." Morrison, a heavy man who carried authority like a burden he resented, barely glanced at her papers. "Mr. Hale has a certified surveyor preparing a new assessment. Until it's complete, you'll need to cease all activity on the disputed land." "We'll do no such thing," Lena said. "The land is legally ours, documented and filed. If Mr. Hale disputes that, he can file a formal challenge through proper channels. Until then, we continue normal operations." Morrison's face darkened. "You're refusing a lawful order. I'm refusing an unlawful harassment disguised as an order. There's a difference." Lena's voice remained perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "You have no legal authority to restrict our use of our own documented property based on a promised future survey. If you persist, I'll file a formal complaint with the territorial marshal regarding abuse of authority." The threat hung in the air. Morrison knew it was real, knew that Lena had the competence and determination to follow through. His authority was local, but territorial complaints could bring oversight he didn't want. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, directing the words at Caleb. "Hale's a patient man, but he doesn't forget opposition." "Neither do we," Caleb said quietly. "You can tell him we'll be here as long as we choose to be. Legal, documented, and not going anywhere." After Morrison left, Red whistled low. Well, that's the gauntlet thrown down proper. That was a pro, Lena said, already writing up notes on the encounter. Date, time, exact words exchanged, witnesses present, testing our resolve, seeing if we'd fold under legal pressure. When we didn't, Hale learned something important. We're organized and we know our rights. That'll make him more cautious. Or more aggressive, Red countered. Possibly. But aggressive means visible. Visible means documentable. Documentable means eventual evidence. She finished her notes and looked up. We need to accelerate our legitimization. Complete the territorial survey, file incorporation papers, get everything certified and recorded as quickly as possible. The more official we are, the harder we are to touch. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of frantic organization. Lena coordinated the entire operation with military precision, hiring a certified surveyor to document boundaries, preparing incorporation papers for their cooperative association, traveling to the territorial capital herself to file everything in person and obtain official certifications. Caleb went with her, leaving Red in charge of the ranch. The 3-day journey gave them time together beyond the constant crisis management, time to talk beyond strategy and documentation. You've done this kind of organizing before, Caleb said, as their stage rattled through mountain passes. It's not just watching your father. You've built something yourself. Lena was quiet for a long moment, watching landscape roll past. Finally, she said, After my husband died, I discovered our finances were a disaster. He'd been a good man, but a terrible businessman, invested poorly, borrowed recklessly, trusted the wrong partners. When he died, the debts came due. Our creditors wanted everything, the house, the business, every asset we'd built together. What did you do? I organized, documented every debt, every asset, every claim, found errors in their accounting, challenged improper charges, negotiated payment terms, fought them with their own paperwork until they realized I'd be more expensive to crush than to compromise with. Eventually we settled. I kept the house. They took the business. Everyone walked away bruised but alive. That's when you started bookkeeping professionally? That's when I learned that documentation and organization are power, that knowledge and proof matter more than strength or money, that a woman with accurate records and systematic thinking can fight men with 10 times her resources and win, if she's willing to be patient and precise. She turned to face him. Your ranch reminded me of my situation then. Assets being slowly bled away, opposition that seemed overwhelming, everyone expecting you to fold and disappear. I saw a chance to apply what I'd learned, to fight smarter instead of harder, and to stop running from your father's death. She flinched slightly. That too. He taught me how to fight, but he lost because he fought alone. I wanted to prove his methods could work with proper support and alliance. Wanted to finish what he started, in a way. Make his lessons mean something. Caleb reached across and took her hand, the first deliberately personal touch since that handshake sealing their trial agreement. They mean something. You've built more in 2 weeks than I built in 3 years. Not just organization, hope. You gave people hope. Her fingers tightened around his. Hope's dangerous if it's not backed by capability. That's why the documentation matters so much. We're not offering false comfort. We're offering real structure, real strategy, real chance at winning. And if we lose, then we lose having fought properly. But I don't intend to lose. At the territorial capital, Lena navigated bureaucracy with the same systematic efficiency she applied to everything else. She filed their cooperative incorporation papers, obtained certified copies of all land surveys and water rights, registered their association with territorial authorities, and created multiple backup copies of every document. Why so many copies? Caleb asked as she purchased her 5th set of certified duplicates. Because documents can be destroyed, lost, conveniently misplaced. One copy lives in our files, one goes to each member of the cooperative, one stays with territorial authorities, one goes to a lawyer in the capital for safekeeping, and one gets mailed to my sister in Philadelphia as final insurance. Hale can burn down buildings, but he can't destroy distributed documentation. Her thoroughness was almost frightening in its implications. She was planning for every contingency, preparing for total warfare while hoping for peaceful resolution. It reminded Caleb of how generals prepared for battle, hope for diplomacy, prepare for annihilation. On the journey back, as their stage climbed back into the high country, Lena said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me do this my way instead of insisting on some conventional approach. Conventional wasn't working. Your way makes sense. Your way kept you alive for 3 years. That's not nothing. Survival isn't living. You taught me that." He looked at her profile, strong and certain against the mountain backdrop. "My wife, Sarah, she would have liked you. She believed in fighting for things, building despite obstacles. I lost that when she died. You brought it back." Lena met his eyes, something vulnerable flickering in her expression. "I hope I can live up to that." "You already have." They arrived back to find the ranch transformed in their absence. Red and the others had built a proper signal station on the high ridge, visible from the Henderson, Murphy, and Chen properties. They'd completed a full cattle count and updated fencing on the disputed eastern boundary. They'd organized the bunkhouse, expanded the corrals, and implemented the specialized labor system Lena had proposed. "Danny's running the horse program exclusively now," Red reported. "Carlos is handling territory patrols and tracking. Tom's focused on cattle management and training. And we hired young Miguel Santos from town for general labor. Everything's running smoother than it has in years." Lena smiled, genuine pleasure at seeing her systems implemented successfully. "Profit margins? Up 8% already, even accounting for Miguel's wages. Efficiency gains are real." "And Hale?" Red's expression darkened. "Quiet. Too quiet. His men patrol the boundaries regular, but no direct action. It's making everyone nervous. Feels like a storm building." That night, gathered around the table with their cooperative's core members, Lena spread out their newly certified documents like a general displaying battle plans. "We're official now," she announced. "The High Valley Ranching Cooperative, legally incorporated, territorially certified, with documented boundaries and water rights that no local sheriff can dispute. Whatever Hale does next, he's fighting a legitimate legal entity, not isolated individuals." "So what does he do next?" Patrick Murphy asked. "He either accepts reality and leaves us alone, or he escalates beyond what legal manipulation can accomplish. If he escalates, it'll be visible. And visibility is what we need for federal intervention." "You're saying we're waiting for him to commit obvious crimes?" Sean's voice carried frustrated energy. "Just sitting here hoping he attacks so we can document it?" "No. We're continuing to build and improve while maintaining documentation of any harassment. We don't want violence, but if it comes, we'll be ready to prove who started it and who responded in legitimate self-defense." The storm Red had sensed broke 4 days later, not with violence, but with economics. Hale's influence had been wielded quietly, systematically, and devastatingly. The cooperative members discovered that Thompson's Supply had stopped extending credit to any rancher in their association. The bank in Dust Creek had called in several small loans early, demanding immediate payment. Buyers who'd previously purchased cattle were suddenly unavailable or offering prices well below market value. Financial warfare, precise and calculated. "He's trying to starve us out," Thomas Henderson said, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We can't operate without credit, can't sell cattle at those prices." "Then we don't use his systems," Lena said calmly, though Caleb could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, already calculating responses. "The Silver Falls supplier I mentioned, I've already established credit terms with them. We shift all supply purchasing there. The bank called in your loans? We pool resources, cover the immediate debts, then move our collective accounts to the territorial bank in the capital. They're beyond Hale's influence. As for cattle sales, we find new buyers." "Where?" Jacob asked. "Hale's got relationships with every major buyer in the territory. Then we go outside the territory. There's a rail hub 200 miles south that connects to eastern markets. We drive our combined herds there, sell directly to distributors, cut out the local buyers entirely." "That's a major operation," Red said. "We're talking about combining herds, coordinating a long drive, managing logistics, which is exactly what a cooperative is designed to do. Pool resources, share labor, accomplish together what we couldn't manage separately." Lena was already making notes, planning. "We do a combined fall drive. All our cattle, one coordinated effort. Split the costs, split the labor, all reap the benefits of better market access." It was audacious. It was risky. It was also exactly the kind of bold move that could break Hale's economic stranglehold. Over the next week, they planned with military precision, combined cattle count, route mapping, supply calculation, labor coordination. The cooperative would drive nearly 300 head south to the rail hub, a journey of 2 weeks through mountain passes and open range. It would leave their ranches vulnerable. It would stretch their resources thin. It would also prove they could operate independently of Hale's economic control. The night before the drive was scheduled to begin, Caleb found Lena on the porch, staring at stars that blazed cold and distant above the high valley. "Having doubts?" he asked. "Having certainties. This is the moment everything changes. Either we succeed and prove we can survive without Hale's systems, or we fail and lose everything in one coordinated disaster." She didn't look at him. "I keep running the numbers, checking the logistics, looking for what I missed. But I think we're as ready as we'll ever be. You've done everything possible, more than possible. And if it's not enough? Then we tried, really tried, the way you said, fighting properly instead of just bleeding slowly." He stepped closer. "I want you to know, whatever happens, these past weeks, building this with you, it's meant something. You brought life back to this place. To me." She turned then, and in the starlight, her face was softer than he'd ever seen it, vulnerable and uncertain. "The trial period? The 30 days. We're past that now." They were. The month had come and gone while they'd been organizing, fighting, building. Neither had mentioned it, both too focused on survival to address the personal agreement that had brought them together. "Do you want to leave?" Caleb asked, and held his breath for the answer. "No." The word was quiet but absolute. "I want to stay. I want to see this through. I want to—" She stopped, struggling with something. "I want to build something lasting, not just fight Hale, but create something worth defending. A real community, a real future. With you." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and she kissed him back with matching tenderness. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was promise, potential, two broken people finding unexpected possibility in each other. When they separated, she smiled, soft and genuine. "After the drive, after we prove this works, we'll figure out what comes next." "Deal," he said, and meant it with everything he had. The cattle drive began at dawn, 300 head moving south under watchful guidance, the cooperative's members working in coordinated shifts. They left minimal staff at each ranch, enough to maintain operations, not enough to defend against serious attack. It was calculated risk, deliberate exposure. Lena stayed behind, managing communications and documentation, ready to signal for help if Hale made his move against the vulnerable properties. And 2 days into the drive, standing on the ridge watching for signal fires, she saw the smoke rising from the Murphy ranch. Not signal smoke, real smoke, black and thick and wrong. The war had finally turned hot. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed the signal flare Red had left with her, fired it into the clear afternoon sky. 3 shots in rapid succession, the emergency pattern that meant federal crisis, send help immediately. Then she was running for the barn where Danny had left her the fastest horse, a young gelding with stamina and speed that might make the difference between rescue and catastrophe. The Murphy Ranch was 8 miles west through rough country. She pushed the gelding hard but smart, saving enough for the final approach. Smoke billowed thicker as she got closer, black columns rising like funeral pyres against the mountain sky. Her mind cataloged possibilities with cold efficiency even as fear clawed at her chest. Barn fire, house fire, deliberately set or accidental, Murphy family safe or trapped or worse. She crested the final ridge and her heart stopped. The barn was fully engulfed, flames licking 50 feet into the air, heat visible as shimmer even from distance. The house stood intact but surrounded, 5 mounted men, rifles visible, holding position while the Murphy brothers' home crew of 2 hands stood frozen in the yard, weaponless and helpless. Mrs. Murphy, Patrick's wife Anna, was on the porch clutching their infant daughter, face white with terror. And in the center of it all, still mounted, sat Garrett, Hale's foreman, the man who'd saluted mockingly from the ridge weeks ago. He wasn't hiding his presence, wasn't pretending this was accident or coincidence. He was making a statement. Lena rode straight into the yard, the gelding's hooves loud against hard-packed earth. Every eye turned to her. Garrett's cold and calculating, his men's curious and predatory, the Murphy crew's desperate with hope she represented rescue. "Mrs. Cross," Garrett said, voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. "Shame about this fire. Lightning strike, I'd wager. Terrible, unpredictable, mountain weather." "There hasn't been a cloud in the sky for 3 days." Lena's voice was steady, glacially calm despite the fear racing through her veins. She kept her hands visible, made no move toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "This is arson, deliberate destruction of property, federal crime." Garrett smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "That's a serious accusation. You got proof? Witnesses?" He gestured to his men. "We was just riding through, saw the smoke, came to help. Ain't that right, boys?" Chorus of agreement from his crew, rehearsed and casual. "You're trespassing on private property while a structure burns," Lena said, "preventing the owners from fighting the fire. That's conspiracy to commit arson at minimum." Big words from a woman alone and outgunned. Garrett's smile widened. "Where's your menfolk, Mrs. Cross?" "Oh, that's right. Off playing cattle driver, leaving you ladies vulnerable. Shame how these things work out." Anna Murphy made a small sound of distress, clutching her daughter tighter. One of the Murphy hands shifted his weight, calculating odds and finding them impossible. Lena sat perfectly still, mind racing through options and finding them all terrible. She was alone, unarmed, practically speaking. She could shoot, but 1 rifle against 5 was suicide. The signal fires were lit, help was coming, but it would take time. Red would see the smoke, would bring whoever he could gather, but even riding hard, they were an hour away minimum. An hour was eternity when standing between armed men and defenseless people. "Mr. Hale should know," Lena said, keeping her voice conversational, "that this entire incident is being documented. The High Valley Ranching Cooperative maintains detailed records of all suspicious occurrences. This fire, your presence, your implied threats, all of it goes into our files. All of it becomes evidence." "Evidence for who? Morrison?" Garrett laughed. "He'll rule it accidental, just like always." "Not for Morrison. For federal authorities. We've already filed preliminary reports with the territorial marshal regarding a pattern of harassment and intimidation. This adds to that pattern, makes it harder to dismiss as isolated incidents." Something flickered in Garrett's expression. Not fear exactly, but calculation recalibrating. "You're bluffing. Territorial marshal don't care about small ranchers and barn fires. He cares about organized criminal activity, about systematic land theft through intimidation, about interstate commerce disruption if our cooperative's cattle drive gets interfered with." Lena held his gaze. "You're not just burning a barn, Mr. Garrett. You're creating federal evidence of racketeering. Every action you take today gets documented and added to a growing case file that's already in territorial hands." It was half bluff. They'd filed preliminary complaints but had no guarantee of federal attention. But Garrett didn't know that. More importantly, Victor Hale didn't know that. And men like Hale, who built empires on corruption and intimidation, feared federal oversight more than anything. "Mighty confident for someone sitting alone with a rifle she ain't even touched," one of Garrett's men said, hand drifting toward his weapon. "Touch it, and you're committing assault with deadly weapon in front of multiple witnesses," Lena said calmly. "That's territorial prison, not county jail. Federal charges, not local ones. Think carefully about whether you want your name in those records alongside Garrett's and Hale's." The man's hand stopped. Fear of local law was one thing. Corrupt sheriffs could be bought or intimidated. Fear of federal prosecution was different. That was real prison, real consequences beyond the reach of local power. Garrett saw his advantage slipping, saw Lena turning the situation from simple intimidation into legal liability. Brave words, but words don't stop bullets. "No," Lena agreed, "but bullets leave evidence. Bodies bring marshals. Federal marshals, not local sheriffs. You want to explain to territorial authorities why you murdered a woman in front of witnesses while her property burned? Because that's what this becomes if you escalate. Not accident, not intimidation. Murder. Federal murder charges for you and every man here." Silence stretched taut as wire. The barn burned behind them, heat pressing against Lena's back, flames roaring their hunger. Anna Murphy's baby started crying, thin wail cutting through tension. Garrett's jaw worked. He was calculating odds, weighing orders from Hale against personal risk. Intimidation was one thing. Hale could protect him from local consequences for that. Murder was different. Murder brought attention, investigation, consequences even Hale's money and influence couldn't completely shield against. "This ain't over," Garrett said finally. "You tell your cooperative, tell Vance and the rest. This valley belongs to Mr. Hale. You're squatters pretending at legitimacy. Smart people take the buyout offers while they're still on the table. Stubborn people," he gestured at the burning barn. "Accidents happen to stubborn people." "Threats witnessed and documented," Lena said. "Thank you for being so explicit. Makes the federal case much cleaner." Garrett's face darkened with fury, but he was trapped now. Anything he did would only prove her point, would only add to the documented pattern she'd already established in his mind. He wheeled his horse viciously. "Let's go." His men followed, relief visible in their postures. They'd signed up for intimidation, maybe some property damage, not federal murder charges. Lena waited until they were out of sight before her hands started shaking. Delayed reaction, adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She'd gambled everything on Garrett's uncertainty, on the possibility that fear of federal consequences would outweigh orders to intimidate. She'd been lucky, desperately, terrifyingly lucky. Anna Murphy was off the porch in seconds, still clutching her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us. You saved us all." "I bought us time," Lena corrected, dismounting on legs that felt uncertain. "The barn's still gone. They'll be back eventually, but yes, for today, we survived." The Murphy hands were already organizing bucket lines from the well, fighting to save what they could, though the barn was clearly lost. Lena helped Anna move essential items from the house into the wagon, preparing for evacuation if the fire spread. Red arrived 40 minutes later with Tom and old Henderson in tow, riding hard and armed for war. They found the barn collapsed into smoldering ruins, the house safe, and Lena calmly documenting everything in her notebook while Anna fed her baby and the hands salvaged what little remained. "What happened?" Red demanded, taking in the scene with experienced eyes that cataloged disaster and survival in equal measure. Lena told him, voice steady, reciting facts with the detachment of someone writing a report. Garrett's arrival, his implied threats, the standoff, his eventual retreat. Red's face darkened progressively through the account. "You confronted 5 armed men alone," he said when she finished. "I confronted 5 men making illegal threats on private property and reminded them of federal consequences." "Different thing." "You could have been killed." "I could have. So could Anna and her daughter, and the hands if I'd hidden on that ridge instead of riding down. Sometimes the choice is between terrible risks and worse certainties." She closed her notebook. "The important thing is we have witnesses, documented threats, and clear evidence of arson. This goes into the federal file." Another piece of the pattern. Thomas Henderson was staring at the burned barn with hollow eyes. "They'll do this to all of us. Pick us off one by one while the men are away on the drive." "Possibly," Lena agreed, "which is why we're consolidating. Anna and the baby come back to Caleb's ranch with me. The Murphy hands stay here to maintain appearance of occupation, but they're armed and authorized to use deadly force in self-defense if Hale's men return. We send word to the drive. Patrick and Sean need to know what happened, but they continue the mission. We don't let Hale disrupt our economic independence." "You're gambling with people's lives," Thomas said. "I'm making calculated decisions in a crisis. If we abandon the drive, we lose our best chance at proving we can operate independently of Hale's economic control. If we consolidate families and defend strategically, we minimize vulnerability while maintaining operational capability." Lena's voice softened slightly. "I know it's hard. I know it's terrifying. But panic helps Hale. Discipline and documentation hurt him." They worked through the evening securing the Murphy property, salvaging what they could from the barn ruins, preparing the hands for potential siege while evacuating Anna and the baby to safety. By the time they rode back to Caleb's ranch, full dark had fallen, and Lena's exhaustion was so complete she could barely stay in the saddle. Red helped her down, concern etched in every line of his weathered face. "You need rest. Real rest. Not your usual 4 hours and back to work. I need to document everything while it's fresh. Garrett's exact words, timeline of events, witness statements. Can wait 6 hours. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. He was right, much as she hated admitting it. Lena let him guide her to the house, let Anna press hot tea into her hands, let the events of the day finally catch up with her. She was asleep before she finished the tea, slumped in the chair at Caleb's table, notebook still clutched in her hand. She woke to find herself in Caleb's bed, blanket tucked around her, early morning light streaming through the window. For a moment she panicked. How long had she slept? What had she missed? Were they under attack? Before memory reassembled itself. Anna must have moved her, let her sleep through the night. Lena found her boots, splashed water on her face, and emerged to find the household already awake and organizing. Anna was feeding her daughter. Red was coordinating with the hands about patrol schedules, and a rider from the Henderson Ranch was delivering news that Martha had seen signal fires and wanted to know if they should consolidate families there as well. Yes, Lena said immediately. Anyone vulnerable concentrates at whichever property has best defensive position. We maintain skeleton crews at each ranch to prevent appearance of abandonment, but families and non-essential personnel consolidate. Hale wants to terrorize us into isolation. We respond with organized concentration. The next 3 days passed in controlled chaos. They fortified Caleb's ranch as the primary stronghold, best water access, most defensible terrain, central location for signal communication. The Henderson and Chen families moved in, turning the house and bunkhouse into temporary commune. Armed riders maintained presence at each property, rotating shifts, never fewer than 2 men anywhere, all authorized for self-defense. Word from the cattle drive came via relay rider. Patrick and Sean Murphy had received news of the fire and wanted to turn back immediately. Lena sent return message. Continue mission. Family safe. Property damage only. Prove our independence by completing the drive. They continued, though Patrick's message said it took everything in him to keep riding south while his home smoldered behind him. Hale's next move came not through violence, but through Morrison. The sheriff arrived with a deputy and papers claiming that the Murphy barn fire was being investigated, and as part of that investigation, all cooperative members needed to provide testimony and documentation. We'll be happy to provide documentation, Lena said, meeting Morrison on the porch, with Red and Tom flanking her. We have detailed records of the incident, including witness testimony placing Garrett and 4 of Hale's men at the scene, making explicit threats before and during the fire. Morrison's expression soured. That's not the kind of documentation I'm looking for. It's the kind that establishes arson and criminal conspiracy. I assume you'll want to arrest Garrett immediately based on this evidence? I'll be determining what evidence is credible, of course, along with the territorial marshal, who'll be receiving copies of all our documentation. We're filing formal federal complaints regarding the systematic harassment and intimidation we've experienced. The Murphy fire is simply the most recent incident in a pattern stretching back years. Morrison's face went red. You're overstepping, Mrs. Cross, making accusations against respected businessmen without proof. We have extensive proof. Documented incidents, witness testimony, financial records showing economic manipulation, and now physical evidence of arson with multiple witnesses to Garrett's presence and threats. That's not accusation. That's documentation. Lena held his gaze. You're welcome to investigate properly, Sheriff. Interview the witnesses, examine the evidence, pursue charges against the actual perpetrators. Or you can continue protecting Hale's interests while we build our federal case. Your choice, but choose quickly. Territorial marshals tend to investigate local law enforcement that refuses to pursue clear evidence of organized crime. It was the nuclear option, threatening federal investigation of Morrison himself. But they were past subtlety now. Hale had escalated to arson and direct threats. Morrison was either going to acknowledge reality or become part of the criminal conspiracy they were documenting. The sheriff left without taking testimony, without examining evidence, without any pretense of legitimate investigation. His departure was answer enough. He'd chosen Hale over law, corruption over duty. That'll make him an enemy, Red observed after Morrison rode off. He was already an enemy. Now we've documented his refusal to investigate clear evidence of arson. That goes in the federal file, too. Lena turned to head back inside, then paused. How long until the drive reaches the rail hub? Another week if weather holds. Week back after that. 2 weeks minimum before Caleb and the others return. 2 weeks. 14 days of maintaining defensive positions, managing consolidated families, documenting incidents, and preparing for whatever Hale threw at them next. It felt like years. That night, with Anna's baby finally asleep and the house quiet except for low voices of guards changing shifts, Lena sat at the desk working through legal documentation. She was drafting formal complaints for the territorial marshal, organizing evidence, building the case that would eventually, she hoped, bring federal intervention. Martha Henderson found her there past midnight, brought her tea without asking. "You should sleep." "I should finish this. If something happens to me, someone needs to know where all the evidence is, how the case is structured, what we've documented." "If something happens?" Martha's voice sharpened. "You expecting violence?" "I'm preparing for all possibilities. Hale's escalating. The barn was a test, seeing if we'd fold under physical destruction. When we didn't, when we responded with legal documentation and federal threats, we called his bluff. Now he has to decide whether to back down or escalate further. And if he escalates, then things get worse before they get better. Violence, probably. Maybe targeted, maybe broad. He'll try to break us psychologically, make us too afraid to continue." Lena set down her pen, rubbed her eyes. "But here's what he doesn't understand. We're already afraid. We've been afraid for years. He's not introducing fear, he's just making it explicit. And explicit fear is easier to fight than implicit dread." Martha was quiet for a moment, processing that. "You talk like someone who's seen real violence, real danger. I watched my father get beaten by strikebreakers when I was 14, watched them break his ribs, fracture his skull, leave him bleeding in the street while police looked the other way. He survived that beating. Died 6 months later from complications the doctors said were unrelated, but we all knew better." Lena's voice stayed steady, factual, but pain bled through the edges. "I learned young that power protects itself through violence, and that fighting power means accepting you might get hurt. The question is whether you get hurt fighting or get hurt surrendering. At least fighting gives you a chance." "Is that what you tell yourself when you ride alone into armed men?" "No. When I do that, I don't tell myself anything. I just act because thinking would mean realizing how terrified I am." Lena managed a small smile. "Courage isn't absence of fear, Martha. It's acting despite fear because the alternative is worse." Martha reached across and gripped her hand, surprising them both. "My son, the one who got run out of the territory, he wanted to fight, wanted to stand up to Hale's men when they told him to leave. I begged him not to, told him it wasn't worth dying for. So he left, and I haven't seen him in 2 years." Tears traced down her weathered cheeks. "I chose his life over his pride." "Was I wrong?" "You chose his survival. That's never wrong. But you're choosing to fight, to risk your life and everyone else's. How is that different?" Lena considered carefully before answering. "Your son was alone. Fighting alone meant certain death for uncertain gain. We're not alone. We're organized, documented, building toward federal intervention. We're not charging blindly into hopeless battle. We're fighting strategically with real possibility of winning. That's the difference. Your son's courage would have been wasted. Ours might actually accomplish something." "Might." "Might," Lena agreed. "But might is more than we had before. Might is worth fighting for." The attack came 4 days later, at dawn when the light was uncertain, and defenders were tired from night watches. 6 riders hit the Chen property hard and fast. Not subtle intimidation this time, but open assault. They drove off the sheep in a coordinated rush, stampeding the flock toward the cliff edge that Jacob had always feared. The guards got off warning shots, enough to alert the consolidated families at Caleb's ranch, but not enough to stop the raid. By the time Red and Tom arrived with reinforcements, 200 sheep had gone over the cliff, and the raiders were disappearing into the mountain passes. Jacob Chen stood at the cliff edge staring down at broken bodies of his flock, scattered on the rocks below, face empty of everything except grief. His entire livelihood, years of work, generational investment, gone in minutes of coordinated violence. "I can't recover from this," he said quietly when Lena arrived. 200 head, that's 3/4 of my flock. The remaining aren't enough to rebuild from. I'm finished." "You're not finished." The cooperative, Can't replace sheep that don't exist, can't undo what's done. Jacob turned to face her, eyes hollow. You were right about documentation, about building a federal case, but federal intervention takes time. Months, maybe years. I don't have months. I'm ruined now. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. All her careful planning, all her documentation and organization and strategic thinking, none of it had prevented this. None of it had saved Jacob's livelihood. She'd been so focused on the long game, on building a case that would eventually bring Hale down, that she'd underestimated his willingness to destroy them in the short term. We'll pool resources, she said, scrambling for solutions. The cooperative shares the loss, helps you rebuild. With what? We're all barely surviving. You've improved margins, made us more efficient, but we don't have spare capital to replace 200 sheep. Jacob's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. You did everything right, Mrs. Cross. The documentation, the organization, the legal strategy, it's all sound. But Hale's fighting dirty and fast while we're building slow and proper. Speed beats thorough when the game's rigged. He was right. Hale had the resources to destroy faster than they could build, had the local authority to act with impunity while they gathered evidence for distant federal intervention, had the patience to grind them down systematically while they scrambled to survive each new crisis. They were losing. Not dramatically, but steadily, inevitably. Each attack took pieces they couldn't afford to lose. Eventually, there'd be nothing left to defend. Red found her later, standing alone on the ridge, staring at nothing. Jacob's packing to leave, taking the buyout offer from Hale. Says he'll use the money to start over somewhere else. Can't blame him. Can't. But it breaks our alliance, makes us weaker. Hendersons are talking about leaving too. Murphy brothers might continue the fight, but their barn's gone and their savings are wiped out. We're fragmenting. Red paused. Lena, I think we need to consider... Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't say we should give up. I'm saying maybe strategic retreat is smarter than noble defeat. We fought well. We organized. We documented. We built something real. But Hale's willing to burn it all down, and we can't stop him. Not really. Not in time to matter. We can if we change tactics. Change how? Lena turned to face him, and her expression was harder than he'd ever seen it, cold and calculating and absolutely determined. We stop playing defense, stop reacting to his moves and waiting for federal intervention that might never come. We take the fight to him directly. That's suicide. No. Suicide is standing still while he destroys us piece by piece. I'm talking about forcing his hand, making him expose himself so completely that even Morrison can't ignore it. Making him commit crimes so obvious, so public, so undeniable that federal intervention becomes immediate instead of eventual. How do we do that? We provoke him, deliberately, strategically, in ways that force him to respond overtly. We've been trying to look legitimate and lawful, hoping that would protect us. Instead, we become problematic enough, visible enough, annoying enough that he has to act decisively. And when he does, we're ready. With witnesses, with documentation, with proof so clear that it forces immediate action. Red stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You want to bait a man who's already burning barns and stampeding livestock? I want to bait him into making a mistake big enough to destroy him. Right now he's operating carefully, maintaining deniability, keeping things just this side of provable. We make him so angry, so threatened, so desperate that he drops the caution. Criminals get caught when they stop being careful, and we might die when he stops being careful. We're dying anyway, just slower. At least this way we go down swinging with chance at taking him with us. The cattle drive returned 6 days later, successful beyond anyone's expectations. They'd reached the rail hub, sold their combined herd at premium prices to Eastern distributors, and returned with profits that exceeded projections by 18%. Patrick and Sean Murphy rode in with enough money to rebuild their barn twice over. The Hendersons had cleared their debts entirely. Even accounting for Jacob's loss and the costs of consolidation, the cooperative had proven economic viability. It should have been victory. Instead, it felt like preparing for a funeral. Caleb took one look at Lena's face and knew something had broken while he'd been gone. She told him everything: the Murphy fire, the Chen raid, Jacob's departure, the Hendersons' doubts, Morrison's corruption, her proposal to escalate deliberately. He listened in silence, watching her pace the room like a caged predator, all her usual controlled composure frayed to raw edges. "You want to provoke him," he said when she finished. "I want to beat him. Provocation is the method. By making ourselves targets. We're already targets. I'm proposing we be strategic targets instead of passive victims." She stopped pacing, faced him directly. "Caleb, everything I've done, the documentation, the organization, the federal complaints, it's all correct. It's all right. But it's too slow. Hale's destroying us faster than justice can save us. We need to accelerate the timeline. By risking everything on one gambit. By forcing the confrontation on our terms instead of his. Yes, it's risky. Yes, people might get hurt. But the alternative is watching our alliance fragment while Hale picks off the survivors. At least this way we fight." Caleb moved to the window, stared out at the ranch he'd built with Sarah, the land he'd defended for 3 years, the future he'd almost given up on until Lena arrived and made him believe in possibility again. "Sarah would have hated this," he said quietly. "She believed in building, not destroying. Creating beauty despite ugliness. She would have said fighting Hale his way makes us like him." "Sarah's not here." Lena's voice was gentle but unyielding. "I wish she was. I wish your way had worked, that my documentation and organization were enough. But wishes don't stop men from burning barns and murdering sheep. Action does." He turned to face her. "What's your plan?" And Lena smiled, sharp and dangerous and absolutely committed. "We give Hale exactly what he fears most. We expand. Publicly, visibly, undeniably. We file new water rights claims on contested territory. We announce plans to triple our cooperative membership. We purchase advertisement in the territorial newspaper declaring our success and inviting other ranchers to join our alliance. We make ourselves so visible, so legitimate, so threatening to his monopoly that he has to act decisively. He'll come at us with everything. Yes, and we'll be ready, armed, prepared, with every possible witness and documentation in place. We'll turn his attack into a public spectacle that even Morrison can't cover up. We'll make him the criminal everyone knows he is instead of the businessman he pretends to be." It was audacious, possibly insane, definitely the kind of all-or-nothing gambit that either broke through or destroyed everything. Caleb thought of 3 years spent surviving carefully, thought of weeks spent building something real with Lena, thought of the choice between slow defeat and risky defiance. "We'll need the others to agree," he said. "Can't do this if the cooperative fractures." "Then let's ask them." The meeting that night brought together everyone who remained, the Murphy brothers, still raw from seeing their barn in ashes but grimly determined, the Hendersons, wavering but not yet broken, red in the hands, loyal but exhausted, Anna Murphy with her baby, Martha Henderson with her weathered strength. Jacob Chen was already gone, but his absence spoke its own truth about the cost of this fight. Lena laid out her proposal with brutal honesty, the risks, the potential casualties, the possibility of total failure. She didn't soften it, didn't promise easy victory or guaranteed success. "This is the pivot point," she said. "We either fade away slowly, accepting buyouts or abandoning our land piece by piece until Hale owns everything. Or we fight now deliberately, with everything we have. Force the confrontation, expose his methods, make him commit crimes so public that federal intervention becomes immediate. It might work, it might fail catastrophically, but it's a choice." "What makes you think he'll take the bait?" Patrick Murphy asked. "Because he's already escalating, already moving from subtle intimidation to open violence. He sees us as existential threat now. A successful cooperative undermines his entire business model of monopoly through intimidation. We're proving small ranchers can organize and thrive. If we succeed, his empire crumbles as others follow our example. He has to destroy us. So we make ourselves bigger targets and hope he destroys himself trying." Sean's voice dripped skepticism. "We make ourselves defended targets who turn his attack into evidence. We're not hoping for luck. We're creating conditions where his likely response becomes his downfall." Lena met each person's eyes in turn. "I won't lie and say it's safe. People might die. Property will certainly be destroyed, But passive surrender guarantees loss. Active resistance gives us a chance. Silence stretched tight. Finally, Martha Henderson spoke, voice steady despite tears on her weathered cheeks. My son left because I told him fighting was foolish. I've regretted it every day since, watching him live in exile while Hale owns the land that should have been his heritage. I'm done choosing fear over dignity. I vote we fight. Thomas Henderson gripped his wife's hand. Together. We fight together. Patrick and Sean Murphy exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. Our barn's already ashes, Patrick said. Can't lose what's already gone. We're in. One by one, they committed, scared but determined, exhausted but unwilling to surrender. When it came to Caleb, he simply said, This is my land, my home, the place Sarah and I built together. I won't give it to Hale without the fight of his life. Whatever comes, we face it standing. And Lena felt something shift inside her, the cold calculation giving way to fierce protectiveness for these people who'd chosen courage over safety, who trusted her strategy despite every reason for doubt. Then we start tomorrow, she said. We make noise. We claim territory. We dare him to stop us. And when he comes, and he will come, we're ready to turn his violence into his end. The advertisement ran in the Territorial Gazette 3 days later, half a page that cost more than they could afford, but delivered exactly the visibility Lena wanted. Bold letters announced the High Valley Ranching Cooperative's successful cattle drive, record profits, and open invitation for new members. It listed every service they offered: shared labor, collective bargaining, mutual protection, documented legal support. It named their officers, their territory, their contact information. It was a declaration of war wrapped in the language of legitimate business. Caleb read it over breakfast, the newspaper crisp and new, ink still sharp enough to stain fingers. Hale's going to lose his mind when he sees this. That's the idea, Lena said, pouring coffee with steady hands despite the anxiety coiling in her gut. We're not hiding anymore. We're claiming space, announcing success, threatening his monopoly publicly. He can't ignore this. Red studied the advertisement with the careful attention of a man evaluating battlefield terrain. How long before he responds? 2 days, maybe 3. He'll need time to see it, process the threat, plan his response. But it'll come. Lena set down the coffee pot. Everyone needs to be ready. No one travels alone. Every property maintains minimum 2 armed guards at all times. Families stay consolidated here. We document everything. The Murphy brothers had already begun rebuilding their barn, but they'd modified the plans based on Lena's suggestion. Stone foundation instead of all-wood construction, multiple exits, water barrels positioned for firefighting. They were building to survive arson next time, not just hoping it wouldn't happen again. Thomas Henderson had fortified his property with trenches and berms that wouldn't stop a full assault, but would slow riders and provide defensive positions. His hands drilled daily with rifles, practicing coordinated fire patterns and retreat procedures. Even Anna Murphy, nursing her infant daughter, had learned to load and fire a pistol. I won't be helpless again, she'd said quietly, and no one had argued. They were transforming from victims into defenders, from isolated targets into organized resistance. It should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like watching a storm build on the horizon, inevitable, approaching, promising destruction. The first response came not from Hale directly, but from the Dust Creek Town Council. Mayor Preston arrived with an official delegation, faces grave with practiced concern. Mrs. Cross, Mr. Vance, the council has concerns about recent tensions in the valley. We're hoping to mediate before things escalate further. Mediate what? Lena asked, meeting them on the porch with Caleb flanking her, Red and Tom visible through the doorway behind. We're operating a legitimate ranching cooperative, conducting legal business. If there are tensions, perhaps you should address the arson and livestock destruction perpetrated against our members. Preston's smile was smooth as oil and just as slippery. Sheriff Morrison investigated those incidents thoroughly. Found no evidence of criminal activity. Found no evidence he was willing to acknowledge, Lena corrected. We have witness testimony, documented timelines, physical evidence. Morrison chose not to pursue it because it implicated individuals connected to Victor Hale. That's corruption, not investigation. The delegation shifted uncomfortably. Preston's smile hardened. These are serious accusations against respected community members. These are documented facts. We filed formal complaints with the territorial marshal. We have certified copies of all evidence. We've built a comprehensive case regarding systematic intimidation, property destruction, and economic manipulation designed to force illegal land consolidation. Lena's voice stayed calm, professional, absolutely unyielding. The town council is welcome to review our documentation if you're genuinely interested in resolving tensions. Otherwise, this conversation is theater designed to make Hale look reasonable while we look obstinate. Preston's face flushed. You're new to this territory, Mrs. Cross. You don't understand how things work here. I understand exactly how things work. Hale controls local authorities through financial influence and intimidation. He operates outside the law while maintaining appearances of legitimacy, and anyone who challenges him gets destroyed systematically while the community pretends not to notice. She leaned forward slightly. What I don't understand is why respected community members enable it. Why men who should value law and order instead protect corruption because it's convenient or profitable or simply easier than fighting. Silence stretched taut. One of the councilmen, younger than the others, uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, spoke up hesitantly. If what you're saying is true, if you have real evidence, why hasn't the territorial marshal acted? Because territorial marshals have entire territories to oversee and escato unlimited resources. Our case is being reviewed, but bureaucracy moves slowly. In the meantime, we're protecting ourselves through legal organization and documented resistance. Sounds like you're preparing for war, like another councilman said. We're preparing to survive. If Hale chooses to make it war, that's his decision. We're simply refusing to die quietly. Preston stood, signaling the delegation's departure. The council wanted to offer peaceful resolution. We've made that offer. What happens next is on your head, Mrs. Cross. What happens next is on Hale's head, Lena corrected. We're defending our legal rights on our legal property. If he attacks us for that, the responsibility is his alone, and the consequences will be his as well. After they left, Caleb released a breath he'd been holding. You just told the town council to go to hell. I told them we won't accept false mediation designed to make us look unreasonable. There's a difference. But Lena's hands were shaking slightly as she poured herself coffee. They'll report back to Hale that we're uncompromising. That'll escalate his timeline. How much time do we have? Not enough? Days? Maybe hours. He's been planning something. The council visit was testing our resolve, seeing if we'd accept compromise. When we didn't, he'll move to the next phase. Red joined them, face grim. Got word from town. Garrett's been recruiting, hiring men from outside the territory, the kind with no local ties who'll do anything for pay. He's building an army. Lena's stomach dropped. Hired guns meant Hale was done with subtle intimidation. Meant he was preparing for something big, something he couldn't use local men for because even corrupt communities had limits on what they'd tolerate from their neighbors. How many men? Don't know exactly, maybe a dozen, maybe more. They're staging at Hale's main ranch, staying out of town deliberately. Whatever's coming, it's soon. Then we accelerate our preparation. Danny, I need you to ride to the territorial capital. Deliver this packet to the marshal's office personally. Tell them we're under imminent threat of armed assault by Victor Hale's hired men. Tell them we're defending ourselves, but we need federal intervention immediately. She was already pulling together documents, sealing them in waterproof leather. Ride hard. Don't stop. Don't trust anyone local. This has to reach territorial authorities. Danny took the packet, face pale but determined. What if I'm too late? What if they attack before I get back? Then we hold until help arrives. But you getting there might be the difference between federal investigation of harassment and federal investigation of massacre. Go. He went, and Lena turned to the others. Everyone else, we fortify. Caleb's ranch is our stronghold. We abandon the pretense of maintaining presence at other properties. Everyone concentrates here. Dig firing positions, create water reserves for firefighting, prepare escape routes if we're overrun. This isn't about looking legitimate anymore. This is about surviving whatever Hale throws at us. The next 36 hours blurred into frantic preparation. They dug trenches at strategic approaches, positioned water barrels at every corner of every building, created hidden caches of ammunition and medical supplies. The women and children were given evacuation protocols. Horses already saddled, route mapped to the Henderson property, which had the best natural defensive position if the main ranch fell. Carlos and Tom took turns on the high ridge with telescopes, watching for movement from Hale's direction. They spotted riders twice, scouts probably, reporting back on defensive preparations. Let them look, Lena thought grimly. Let them see we're ready. Let them report back that we won't be easy victims. Caleb found her on the second night, checking ammunition counts for the third time. You need to sleep. I need to make sure we're ready. We're as ready as we can be. You've done everything possible. He took the ammunition box from her hands, set it down, turned her to face him. Lena, whatever happens tomorrow or the next day, I want you to know this mattered. What we built together, what you taught me about fighting smart instead of just surviving, it mattered. We're not dead yet. Save the meaningful speeches for after we win. I'm not being fatalistic. I'm being honest. His hands found hers, rough and warm and solid. You came here for a 1-month trial. Stayed because you believed we could build something worth defending. You were right. This place, these people, this alliance, it's worth defending, worth fighting for. And if tomorrow brings hell, at least we face it together. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, surprising and unwelcome. She'd been so focused on strategy and preparation that she'd forgotten to feel, forgotten to acknowledge that tomorrow might destroy everything. Might destroy him, this man who'd let her into his life and his land and his broken heart. I don't want to lose you, she said quietly. I don't want to lose any of this. Then we fight like hell to keep it, together. He kissed her then, deep and fierce and full of everything they hadn't had time to say. She kissed him back with matching intensity, pouring 3 months of partnership and respect and growing love into the moment. When they separated, she managed a shaky smile. After we survive tomorrow, we're having a proper conversation about what comes next. Deal, he said, and his answering smile held hope, despite everything. The attack came at dawn, as Lena had predicted. That uncertain light where defenders were tired from night watches and visibility was poor. But they'd prepared for dawn assault, had staggered watch shifts to keep people fresh, had positioned defenders based on likely approach vectors. Carlos spotted them first. 15 riders coming hard from the east, another group of maybe 10 from the north. Coordinated assault, designed to split defensive attention and create chaos. Positions! Red's voice cut through the early morning quiet, sending everyone scrambling to prepared defensive spots. The women and children were already moving toward the evacuation horses, Anna clutching her baby while Martha Henderson moved with grim efficiency. Lena took position behind the stone wall they'd built along the eastern approach, rifle loaded and ready, Caleb beside her with Red on his other side. The Murphy brothers held the northern defense with Tom and 3 of the hands. Carlos stayed on the ridge with the best vantage point, ready to coordinate fire. The riders came within rifle range and Caleb shouted, "Warning shots! Let them know we're armed and ready!" 3 rifles cracked in practice sequence, bullets kicking up dirt 30 yards ahead of the approaching riders. The eastern group pulled up short, clearly not expecting immediate armed response. The northern group did the same. Garrett emerged from the eastern group, staying carefully back from rifle range. "You're on private property," he shouted. "Mr. Hale owns this land legally. You're squatting. Leave now and no one gets hurt." "We have documented legal ownership filed with territorial authorities," Lena shouted back. "You're trespassing on our property with armed men in what appears to be preparation for assault. Leave immediately or we'll defend ourselves." "This is your last warning." "No, this is yours." And Lena's voice carried cold authority that made even Garrett pause. "We have witnesses documenting this entire encounter. We've already filed federal complaints regarding your previous attacks. Any violence here becomes federal assault charges. Armed assault on legal property owners by hired guns is federal crime. You'll hang for it." Uncertainty rippled through the hired men. These weren't loyal Hale employees willing to die for their boss. These were mercenaries who'd signed up for intimidation, not federal murder charges. Lena could see the calculation on their faces, weighing pay against prison. Garrett saw it too, saw his hired army wavering. "Mr. Hale pays well enough to cover your risks. We're within our rights." "You're not!" Another voice, unexpected and carrying legal weight. Everyone turned to see riders approaching from the west. Danny, riding hard. and beside him a man in territorial marshal insignia with 6 federal deputies. Marshal Thomas Brennan was a hard man in his 50s, career lawman who'd seen every kind of frontier corruption and developed zero tolerance for it. He rode straight into the tense standoff with the confidence of federal authority. "Garrett, you and your men are under orders to disperse immediately. Any hostile action will be treated as federal assault and met with deadly force." Brennan's voice carried absolute certainty. "We've reviewed the complaints filed by the High Valley Ranching Cooperative. We've examined documentation of systematic harassment, property destruction, and intimidation. We're here to investigate Victor Hale for organized criminal activity." Garrett's face went white. "You can't. Hale owns half this territory. He owns property. He doesn't own the law, not federal law." Brennan gestured to his deputies, who spread out with rifles ready. "You have 30 seconds to turn around and ride back to Hale's ranch. Otherwise, you're all under arrest for attempted armed assault." The hired guns broke first, turning their horses without waiting for Garrett's orders. They'd been paid to intimidate, not face federal murder charges. Garrett held position a moment longer, fury and fear warring on his face, before he too wheeled around and spurred his horse away. The northern group, seeing the eastern assault collapse, scattered as well. Within minutes, the valley was empty, except for defenders, federal authorities, and the sweet, clean silence of survival. Lena sagged against the stone wall, adrenaline draining and leaving her shaking. Caleb pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him for just a moment before professional necessity reasserted itself. She straightened, composed herself, and walked out to meet Marshal Brennan properly. "Thank you, Marshal. Your timing was impeccable." Brennan dismounted, studying her with sharp eyes. "Mrs. Cross, I presume? Your documentation was extremely thorough. Most comprehensive case of organized criminal activity I've reviewed in 5 years. When your rider arrived saying you were under imminent attack, we rode through the night to get here." "We're grateful. What happens now?" "Now I investigate properly. Interview witnesses, examine physical evidence, build a federal case against Victor Hale and anyone else involved in this systematic intimidation scheme." Brennan pulled out a notebook. "I'll need detailed statements from everyone involved in the incidents you've documented. I'll need to inspect the Murphy Barn site, the Chen property, where the livestock was destroyed. I'll need access to all your records. You'll have complete access to everything." Lena felt hope rising, real and solid, for the first time in weeks. "How long until you can arrest Hale?" "It depends on what the evidence shows, but based on your preliminary documentation, I'd say we have enough for warrants within a week. Trial could take months, but Hale will be in federal custody long before that." It was everything she'd worked toward: federal intervention, legitimate investigation, real consequences for Hale's crimes. Everything the documentation and organization had been building toward, and it was finally, impossibly, actually happening. The next 3 days were consumed by federal investigation. Brennan and his deputies interviewed every member of the cooperative, examined every property, photographed damage, took sworn statements. They arrested Morrison for obstruction of justice when he tried to interfere with their investigation. They brought in territorial surveyors to verify land boundaries. And on the 4th day, they rode to Hale's main ranch with warrants for his arrest on charges of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, intimidation, arson, property destruction, and attempted murder. Hale tried to run, made it 30 miles before federal deputies caught him on the road to the territorial border. They brought him back in chains, his empire crumbling around him as banks called in loans and business partners distanced themselves from a man facing federal prison. Garrett turned witness for reduced charges, gave detailed testimony about every crime Hale had ordered over the past 5 years. The case against Hale became airtight, undeniable, absolutely devastating. But Hale had one last move, one final attempt to escape consequences. His lawyers filed motion after motion, finding technicalities in the warrants, challenging jurisdiction, claiming procedural errors. They managed to get him released on bail pending trial, arguing he wasn't flight risk because his entire business empire was tied to the territory. "It's temporary," Brennan assured them when the news came. "The trial will proceed, and the evidence is solid. He'll go to prison eventually." But eventually felt like defeat after everything they'd survived. Lena stood on Caleb's porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and felt the exhaustion of 3 months of constant crisis finally catch up with her. Caleb found her there, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. "What are you thinking? That we've done everything right and he's still walking free. That justice is supposed to feel better than this. He's finished, Lena. Even if he's out on bail, his empire's collapsed. No one will work with him. No one trusts him. His business is destroyed. We won." "Did we? His lawyers are good. What if they find some technicality that gets charges dismissed? What if he walks away completely? Then we've still won. Look around." Caleb gestured at the valley spread below them. "The cooperative's thriving. The Murphys rebuilt their barn better than before. The Hendersons cleared their debts. New ranchers are asking to join our alliance. You built something that outlasts Hale, regardless of what happens to him personally." He was right. Intellectually, Lena knew he was right. But emotionally, she couldn't shake the feeling that Hale walking free, even temporarily, was injustice they couldn't accept. The answer came 3 days later, not from federal authorities, but from the community itself. Someone, and no one ever quite admitted who, leaked details of Hale's crimes to every newspaper in the territory. Not just the legal charges, but the human stories. Martha Henderson's son driven from his home, Jacob Chen's destroyed livelihood, Anna Murphy's terror while her barn burned. Public opinion turned like a river changing course. Hale wasn't wealthy businessman anymore. He was monster who'd destroyed families for profit. His social standing evaporated. His remaining business contacts abandoned him. His lawyers started receiving death threats and quietly withdrew from the case. And Hale himself, facing complete social and economic ruin even before trial, made one final desperate move. He tried to eliminate the witnesses, sending hired men to attack the cooperative members in one last coordinated assault. But this time, federal deputies were watching, waiting, ready. They caught Hale's men in the act, arrested them with overwhelming evidence, and added witness tampering and attempted murder to Hale's charges. The new crimes were committed while out on bail. The judge revoked it immediately, sent Hale to federal prison pending trial with no possibility of release. Brennan visited to deliver the news personally. He's done. Trial's in 3 months, but the outcome's not in doubt. He'll spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Lena felt something unknot in her chest, tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. It's really over? It's really over. The territory's appointed a new sheriff. Morrison's facing his own charges. Hale's business empire is being liquidated to pay damages. And your cooperative has legal standing to file civil suits for property damage and emotional suffering. You'll likely recover significant compensation. After Brennan left, Lena walked out into the valley alone, needing space to process that they'd actually won. Not just survived, won. Had taken on a corrupt system and broken it through nothing but organization, documentation, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Her father would have been proud, would have seen his methods vindicated, his lessons proven effective. She'd finished what he started, in a way, had proven that power could be challenged successfully if you fought smart and refused to surrender. She found herself at the pond they'd built on the eastern slope, the seasonal depression now full of mountain runoff, water clear and cold and life-giving. It had been their first bold move, the first time they'd claimed territory instead of just defending it. It felt appropriate to end here, where transformation had begun. Caleb found her there as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything gold and rose and promise. He didn't speak, just stood beside her watching water ripple in the evening breeze. Finally, she said, "The 1-month trial is long past. We never did finish that conversation. About what comes next. About whether I stay. Whether this becomes permanent instead of temporary arrangement." Caleb turned to face her fully, and his expression held everything. Respect and partnership and love hard-earned through crisis. "I want you to stay. Not because I need a bookkeeper or ranch manager or strategic thinker, though you're brilliant at all those things. I want you to stay because you've become essential to everything this place is and everything I am, because I love you, because I can't imagine a future without you in it." Lena felt tears spill over, hot and unexpected and absolutely right. "I love you too. Love this land, these people, this life we've built together. I want to stay. want to build something lasting here, want to. He kissed her before she could finish, deep and sure and full of promise. She kissed him back with everything she had, 3 months of partnership and respect transforming into something richer, deeper, permanent. When they separated, she laughed, bright and genuine, the sound of tension finally breaking into joy. So I'm staying. You're staying, he confirmed, as my partner, my wife, if you'll have me, my everything. Yes, she said, simple and absolute. To all of it, yes. They stood together watching the sunset over the valley they'd defended, the land they'd claimed, the future they'd fought for and won. Behind them, lights were coming on in the ranch house where families gathered, in the bunkhouse where hands shared dinner and stories, in the Murphy Ranch visible in the distance where rebuilding continued. The High Valley Ranching Cooperative had survived its greatest test and emerged stronger, more unified, more legitimate than ever. New members were joining weekly. Their model was spreading to other territories where small ranchers faced similar pressures. They'd become proof that organization and documentation could defeat corruption. And Lena Cross, who'd arrived on a stagecoach 3 months ago with one trunk and no guarantees, had become the heart of it all. The strategic mind that had transformed victims into fighters. The stubborn soul that had refused to accept defeat. The fierce protector who'd built something worth defending. Justice had been served. Hale would spend his life in prison. The cooperative would thrive. But more than that, something beautiful had been built from ashes and desperation. A community forged in crisis, a love born in partnership, a future claimed through courage and intelligence and absolute refusal to surrender. The valley was theirs, finally and completely. And they would defend it, build on it, make it flourish for generations to come. Together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a crisp October morning when the aspens had turned gold and the first snow dusted the high peaks. They debated waiting until spring, until things were more settled, until the cooperative was on even firmer ground. But Lena had looked at Caleb across the dinner table one evening and said simply, "We've waited long enough for everything else. Let's not wait for this." So they didn't. The entire valley gathered at Caleb's ranch, their ranch now, Lena reminded herself, still adjusting to the shift from temporary partnership to permanent belonging. The Murphy brothers had built a simple wooden arch decorated with late-season wildflowers that Anna and Martha had gathered from the meadows. Red stood as best man, gruff and uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but fiercely proud. Martha Henderson served as witness, her weathered face soft with emotion that she didn't bother hiding. The traveling minister who served the high country settlements performed the ceremony with dignified simplicity. No elaborate vows, no pretense at fairy tale romance, just two people who'd fought side by side through hell and emerged knowing exactly what they were choosing. Do you, Caleb Vance, take this woman as your lawful wife to stand beside her in hardship and harvest, in loss and prosperity, for as long as you both shall live? Caleb's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. I do. And do you, Lena Cross, take this man as your lawful husband, to stand beside him in hardship and harvest, in loss and prosperity, for as long as you both shall live? Lena felt the weight of the moment, not just marriage, but the final severing of her old life and complete claiming of this new one. Philadelphia was gone, her father's death was past. The woman she'd been when she stepped off that stagecoach was transformed beyond recognition. What remained was who she'd chosen to become. I do, she said, and meant it with everything she was. When Caleb kissed her, the valley erupted in cheers and applause. Danny fired his rifle in celebration until Red smacked him upside the head and told him to save ammunition for actual threats. Anna Murphy's baby wailed at the noise and then laughed when her mother bounced her. Tom Freeman produced a fiddle from somewhere and started playing while Carlos pulled Martha Henderson into an impromptu dance that made her laugh like a girl. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely right. This was her family now, these scarred, stubborn survivors who'd chosen courage over surrender. This was her home, this harsh, beautiful land that demanded everything and gave back just enough to make you believe in tomorrow. The celebration continued through the afternoon with food and music and stories that grew more embellished with each telling. Patrick Murphy recounted Lena's confrontation with Garrett at his burning barn, adding dramatic flourishes about her steely gaze that probably could have stopped bullets. Red told about her first week organizing the books, making it sound like she'd performed miracles instead of basic accounting. As the sun started its descent toward the western peaks, Caleb pulled Lena away from the festivities, led her to the ridge where they could see the entire valley spread below them, their land, their community, their future. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "I keep waiting for the next crisis, the next threat. Keep thinking we can't possibly have actually won, that something will go wrong. That's just your mind adjusting to peace after months of war. Give it time." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulled her close against the evening chill. "We did win, Lena. Completely, definitively. Hale's in prison, his empire's destroyed, the cooperative's thriving. You can let yourself believe it's real." She wanted to. Wanted to trust that the war was truly over, that they could finally build instead of constantly defending. But 3 months of crisis had trained her to expect catastrophe around every corner. The answer to her doubts came 2 days later in the form of a letter from the territorial governor's office. Official stationery, formal language, but the content made Lena's hands shake as she read it. The territory was establishing new regulations for ranching cooperatives, using the High Valley model as template. They were creating legal frameworks for mutual aid associations, collective bargaining, and organized resistance to monopolistic practices. The governor wanted to meet with the cooperative's leadership to discuss expansion of the program territory-wide. "They're making us official policy," Lena said, reading the letter again to make sure she understood correctly. "Our organization, our structure, our methods, they're using them as model for the entire territory." Caleb read over her shoulder, his smile growing with each paragraph. "You didn't just beat Hale. You changed the system that enabled him. That's bigger than one corrupt cattle baron. That's permanent reform." The implications were staggering. Everything they'd built, the documentation systems, the mutual aid protocols, the legal frameworks, would now spread across the territory. Other small ranchers facing similar pressures would have legitimate, official structures to organize their own resistance. The scattered, isolated victims who'd made Hale's empire possible would be replaced by organized, documented, legally supported cooperatives. It was revolution disguised as reform. It was everything her father had fought for, finally implemented and legitimized. Red found them still staring at the letter an hour later, brought them back to immediate reality with news that the first group of new cooperative applicants had arrived for evaluation. 7 ranching families from the southern valleys, each representing small operations that had been slowly crushed by various local monopolies. They'd heard about the High Valley Cooperative's success, had seen the newspaper accounts of Hale's downfall, and wanted to know if the same organizational model could save them. Lena met with them in the main room that had become unofficial cooperative headquarters, Caleb beside her, and the founding members gathered to share their experience. The visitors were weathered, desperate, exhausted in the way that came from too many years of losing slowly. Lena recognized that exhaustion, had seen it in Martha Henderson's eyes, in Jacob Chen's defeated shoulders, in her own reflection during the darkest moments. "Tell us how you did it," the lead rancher said. A woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Jacob but carrying the same weight of systematic oppression. "The newspapers say you beat a man who controlled half the territory through nothing but documentation and organization. That sounds too simple to be true." "It wasn't simple," Lena said. "It was systematic, strategic, and absolutely exhausting. But it worked because we understood that power respects proof more than it respects pleading. Let me show you." She spent the next 3 hours walking them through the entire system, the documentation protocols, the legal filings, the mutual aid structures, the specialized labor divisions, the collective bargaining strategies. She showed them her ledgers, her case files, the certified territorial documents that had given them legal standing to fight. "This is the foundation," she explained, spreading papers across the table. "Documentation creates legitimacy. Legitimacy creates legal standing. Legal standing creates the ability to demand federal intervention when local authorities are corrupt. None of it's dramatic or exciting, but all of it's essential." "What about when they escalate to violence?" Sarah Chen asked. "Our cattle baron hasn't burned any barns yet, but he's getting more aggressive. Fences cut, cattle stolen, water access disputed. It feels like we're heading toward where you were. Then you prepare defensively while building your case offensively, Lena said. You don't wait for federal intervention. You create conditions that make federal intervention inevitable. Every incident gets documented in triplicate. Every threat gets witnessed and recorded. Every suspicious occurrence goes into the pattern file. You build a case so comprehensive that when you finally present it to territorial authorities, they can't ignore it. Patrick Murphy jumped in with practical details about defensive preparations. The fortifications they'd built, the communication systems they'd established, the evacuation protocols for families. Martha Henderson talked about the psychological toll and how they'd supported each other through the worst of it. By the time the sun set, the visiting families had pages of notes, copies of template documents, and something more valuable than any of it, hope that their situations weren't hopeless, that organization and documentation could actually defeat corruption. We'll start immediately, Sarah Chen said, gripping Lena's hand with fierce determination. Build the documentation systems, file the territorial papers, create the legal framework. How long before we should expect results? Months, probably, Lena said honestly. Maybe longer, depending on how entrenched the corruption is in your region. But every day you exist as organized opposition, you get stronger. Every day you document, you build your case. And eventually, if you're thorough and stubborn and refuse to surrender, you win. After they left, Caleb found Lena at the desk, already drafting template documents for other cooperatives to use. You're going to organize the entire territory, aren't you? Someone has to. The system that enabled Hale exists everywhere, small operators getting crushed by monopolies while local authorities look the other way. If our methods can spread, if cooperatives can organize territory-wide, we create counterbalance to that concentrated power. That's not just running a ranch anymore. That's political organizing on a massive scale. Lena set down her pen, considered. I suppose it is. Is that a problem? No, Caleb said slowly. It's who you are. I married a woman who sees systematic problems and builds systematic solutions. I just want to make sure you're not taking on too much. I'm not trying to reform the entire West, Lena said, though part of her wondered if that's exactly what she was trying to do. I'm just sharing what worked for us, making it available to others who need it. The Territorial Governor's Office is helping now. They'll create official frameworks and legal support. I'm just providing the template and practical experience. The territorial meeting took place 3 weeks later in the capital, bringing together cooperative leaders from across the region, along with government officials, legal experts, and representatives from the Federal Marshal Service. Lena and Caleb attended as founding members of the High Valley Cooperative, but quickly found themselves positioned as primary experts on cooperative organization and anti-corruption documentation. The governor himself attended, a pragmatic man who'd built his political career on progressive reform and saw cooperatives as solution to the territory's ongoing problems with monopolistic land consolidation. What you've accomplished in High Valley represents exactly the kind of organized resistance we need to encourage, he told the assembled group. Not vigilante justice, not violent rebellion, but legal, documented, systematic opposition to corruption. I'm proposing territorial legislation that would formally recognize and support ranching cooperatives, provide legal frameworks for their operation, and establish federal oversight to prevent the kind of abuses Mr. Hale perpetrated. The room buzzed with reaction. Excitement from small ranchers who saw salvation in official support, concern from larger operators who feared loss of competitive advantage, calculation from lawyers who saw new areas of practice. Lena stood to address the assembly, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The cooperative model works because it transforms isolated victims into organized opposition. Every small rancher facing pressure from monopolies thinks they're alone, thinks their situation is unique, thinks they don't have resources to fight. Cooperatives prove all of that wrong. You're not alone. You're part of organized group. Your situation isn't unique, it's systematic pattern. And you do have resources when you pool them strategically. She walked them through the High Valley model in detail. The documentation systems, the mutual aid structures, the legal frameworks. She showed them actual documents, explained actual strategies, provided actual templates they could adapt for their own situations. The key is understanding that you're not fighting individual battles against individual opponents, she continued. You're fighting systematic corruption that operates the same way everywhere. Once you understand the system, you can build counter-system. Document instead of just complaining. Organize instead of remaining isolated. Use law as weapon instead of accepting that law only protects the powerful. An older rancher from the eastern valleys stood up, skeptical but curious. This all sounds fine in theory, Mrs. Vance, but what happens when they escalate beyond what documentation can stop? When they burn your barn or stampede your livestock or threaten your family? Documents don't stop bullets. You're right, Lena agreed. Documents don't stop bullets, but documents create consequences for bullets. When Hale burned the Murphy barn, we documented it. When he stampeded Chen's sheep, we documented it. When he sent armed men to assault our property, we documented it. Each incident became evidence. Each piece of evidence built the pattern. The pattern eventually became a federal case that put him in prison for life. Eventually, the rancher emphasized, the rancher. What about the people who died or were ruined before eventually arrived? The question hit hard because it was fair. Jacob Chen had lost his livelihood despite all their documentation. The Murphy barn had burned despite all their preparation. People had suffered despite doing everything right. You're correct that documentation isn't immediate protection, Lena said carefully. It's long-game strategy. But the alternative, fighting without documentation, without organization, without legal framework, that's guaranteed loss. At least documented resistance has chance of eventual victory. An eventual victory is better than certain defeat. Caleb stood beside her, adding his perspective. I spent 3 years trying to survive alone. Lost ground every year, watched my neighbors get crushed one by one, felt powerless to change anything. Then Lena arrived and showed me a different way. Not easier way, harder in many respects, but a way that actually worked. That's what cooperatives offer, actual working strategy instead of slow defeat. The discussion continued for hours, ranging from practical details of cooperative organization to philosophical questions about the role of government in regulating business to legal technicalities of establishing formal frameworks. By the end of the day, the governor had commitments from enough legislators to pass formal cooperative support legislation, and Lena had commitments from 43 different ranching operations to establish their own cooperatives using the High Valley model. It was more than victory. It was transformation. The ride back to the valley took 3 days through early winter weather, snow starting to dust the high passes. Lena spent the journey alternating between excitement about what they'd accomplished and exhaustion from months of constant crisis finally catching up with her. On the second night, camped in a way station halfway home, Caleb found her staring into the fire with distant expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My father. Wishing he could have seen this, seen his methods vindicated, his strategies proven effective. He died thinking he'd failed, that fighting power was hopeless. I wish I could tell him it wasn't hopeless. That systematic documentation and organization actually works if you're patient and thorough. He'd be proud of you, proud of what you built. I built it because of what he taught me, because I watched him fight and learned from both his successes and his failures. He tried to change the system alone. I learned to build alliances first, then change the system together." Lena turned from the fire to look at Caleb. That's what makes the difference. Not individual courage or intelligence or determination, collective action. People working together toward shared goal. Is that what we are? Collective action? We're partnership. Different thing. She smiled, reaching for his hand. Collective action is what we built with the cooperative. You and me. We're something else, something I didn't expect when I answered your advertisement. What did you expect? Survival arrangement, practical partnership, mutual benefit without emotional complication. She laughed quietly. I expected to evaluate whether I could tolerate ranch life, whether you seemed reasonable, whether the situation was tenable. I expected 1-month trial followed by either departure or resigned acceptance. What did you find instead? Home, purpose, love, though I fought against admitting it for weeks. You were supposed to be a convenient temporary solution while I figured out what came next. Instead, you became what came next. Caleb pulled her close, and she leaned into his warmth against the mountain cold. I ordered practical mail-order partner. Got revolutionary who reorganized my entire life and probably won't stop until she's reformed the whole territory. Is that complaint? That's observation, and maybe warning that I know you're not done. The cooperative legislation is just beginning. You'll keep building, keep organizing, keep transforming victims into fighters. That's who you are. Does it bother you? No. It's why I love you. You don't accept defeat or injustice or systematic oppression. You see problems and build solutions. You turn chaos into order and fear into action. That's remarkable. He kissed her forehead. Just promise me you'll remember to actually live life instead of constantly fighting battles. That you'll take time to enjoy what we've built instead of always preparing for next crisis. It was fair request, and Lena knew he was right. She'd spent 3 months in constant crisis mode, always planning 3 moves ahead, always preparing for worst case. Even now, with Hale in prison and the cooperative thriving and territorial support secured, part of her was scanning for threats and calculating contingencies. I'll try, she promised. But you have to help me. Remind me when I'm obsessing over documentation that could wait. Drag me away from the desk occasionally. Make me remember that we won, that it's safe to breathe now. Deal, he said, and sealed it with a kiss that made her forget about cooperatives and documentation and systematic reform entirely. They arrived home to find the valley transformed in their absence. The community had organized a proper celebration, not just for the wedding they'd missed while attending the territorial meetings, but for everything they'd accomplished together. The Murphy barn stood completed, better than the original with stone foundation and multiple water systems for fire protection. The Hendersons had expanded their operation, bought additional cattle with the compensation money from Hale's liquidated assets. New families had moved into the valley, claiming land that Hale's empire had held vacant for speculation. And in the center of it all, at Caleb and Lena's ranch, the community had built something unexpected, a proper meeting hall, simple but solid, large enough to hold cooperative gatherings and territory-wide assemblies. Red met them at the gate, grinning like a fool. Surprise, we figured if you're going to be organizing the whole territory, you needed proper headquarters. Everyone pitched in, labor, materials, time. It's not fancy, but it's functional. Lena stared at the building, throat tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the structure itself, though that was impressive. It was what it represented, the community investing in collective future, building infrastructure for continued cooperation and mutual support. It's perfect, she managed finally. Absolutely perfect. The celebration that night filled the new meeting hall to capacity. Food and music and stories, children running between adults' legs while babies slept in makeshift cradles. It was chaotic and loud, and exactly the kind of community celebration that Lena had never imagined being part of, but now couldn't imagine living without. Martha Henderson found her near midnight, brought her a cup of coffee and a quiet moment away from the noise. You did this, built this community from scattered, broken people who'd given up hope. I just organized what was already here, Lena protested. No, you created something new. You taught us that we didn't have to accept defeat. The documentation and organization could actually defeat power. You showed us we were stronger together than alone. That's not just organization, that's transformation. Lena didn't know how to respond to that, so she just gripped Martha's hand and let the moment speak for itself. The winter that followed was the first peaceful season any of them could remember. Snow fell heavy in the high country, isolating the valley but not threatening it. The cooperative members had prepared properly, adequate supplies, maintained equipment, coordinated labor for emergency situations. They weathered storms together, shared resources during hard weeks, celebrated together when the worst passed. Lena spent the quiet months developing detailed templates for other cooperatives, documentation systems, legal frameworks, organizational structures. She corresponded with the Territorial Governor's Office, helped draft the formal cooperative legislation that would establish official government support. She wrote comprehensive guide to fighting monopolistic corruption through systematic documentation, and the territorial press published it as educational pamphlet distributed free to rural communities. But she also learned to step back occasionally, to let the systems she'd built run without constant intervention. She learned to sit by the fire with Caleb in the evenings, talking about small things instead of crisis management. She learned to ride through the valley, appreciating its beauty instead of cataloging its defensive positions. She learned, slowly and imperfectly, that she'd actually won and could allow herself to enjoy victory. Spring came with the usual mountain drama: explosive snowmelt, creeks running high and wild, the valley transforming from white silence to green chaos seemingly overnight. The pond on the eastern slope filled exactly as Lena had calculated, providing water for expanded grazing that increased their cattle capacity by 20%. And with spring came news that Hale's trial had concluded, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 30 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. His remaining assets were liquidated to pay damages to his victims. The systematic corruption he'd built was dismantled completely, replaced by new territorial regulations that made such monopolistic abuse significantly harder to perpetrate. When Brennan delivered the news personally, riding up to the ranch on a fine May morning, Lena felt the last piece of tension she'd been carrying finally release. It was truly over. Completely, definitively, permanently over. "There's one more thing," Brennan said, pulling an official document from his saddlebag. "The territory wants to recognize your contribution to anti-corruption reform. They're awarding you official commendation for exemplary citizenship and systematic documentation that enabled federal prosecution. Governor wants to present it formally at the Territorial Assembly next month." Lena took the document, read the formal language that praised her extraordinary dedication to justice through meticulous documentation and organizational leadership. It felt surreal, being officially recognized for what had felt like desperate survival. "I don't need commendation," she said. "I just wanted to stop Hale from destroying more families." "You did more than that. You created template for fighting corruption anywhere it exists. That's worth recognizing." After Brennan left, Caleb found her on the porch, staring at the commendation like it might be some kind of trick. "You're a hero," he said, only half teasing. "I'm a bookkeeper who got angry and refused to accept defeat. That's different." "Is it? You transformed an entire territory's approach to fighting corruption. You created systems that will protect people for generations. That sounds pretty heroic to me." Lena set down the commendation, turned to face him fully. "You know what I actually am? Lucky. Lucky that I had documentation skills from my father. Lucky that I arrived when I did. Lucky that the cooperative members trusted me enough to try my methods. Lucky that Danny reached the territorial marshal in time. Lucky in 100 different ways that could have gone wrong, but didn't." "Luck is part of it," Caleb agreed. "But so is skill and determination and absolute refusal to surrender. Don't minimize what you accomplished just because you can see how it might have failed." He was right, and Lena knew it, but accepting recognition still felt strange after months of simply fighting to survive. The Territorial Assembly the following month brought together representatives from across the region for the formal presentation of the anti-corruption legislation that had grown from the High Valley model. Lena stood on stage beside the governor while he signed the bill into law, officially establishing territorial support for ranching cooperatives and creating legal frameworks for documented resistance to monopolistic practices. This legislation exists because of the extraordinary courage and systematic thinking demonstrated by Lena Vance and the High Valley Ranching Cooperative, the governor said to the assembled crowd. They proved that organized, documented resistance can defeat corruption. They created template that will protect small operators throughout our territory. They transformed victims into victors through nothing but intelligence, determination, and absolute commitment to justice. The applause was thunderous, overwhelming, embarrassing in its intensity. Lena stood there feeling like an imposter, like someone who'd stumbled into recognition she didn't deserve. But when she looked out at the crowd, she saw faces she recognized. Sarah Chen and her family, the Southern Valley cooperatives that had organized using their methods, dozens of small ranchers who'd found hope in their example. This wasn't about her personally. This was about what they'd built collectively, what they'd proven was possible. After the ceremony, she was surrounded by people wanting advice, asking questions, seeking guidance for their own situations. She spent hours explaining documentation systems, legal strategies, organizational frameworks. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Late that night, back in their hotel room, Caleb found her making notes about questions she'd been asked and solutions she wanted to develop. "You're supposed to be celebrating," he said. "I am celebrating, by making sure other people can replicate what we did. That's the whole point, Not individual victory, but systematic change. Even revolutionaries need to sleep sometimes. Lena laughed, set down her notes, let him pull her into bed. Fine, I'll sleep. But tomorrow I start developing advanced documentation templates for cooperatives facing multiple simultaneous threats. And I want to write comprehensive guide to navigating corrupt local authorities while building federal case. And I think we should establish training program for cooperative organizers. Caleb silenced her with a kiss. Tomorrow. Tonight, just be here with me. Be my wife instead of Territory's chief anti-corruption strategist. She kissed him back, let herself sink into the moment instead of always planning ahead. I can do that. For tonight, at least. I'll take what I can get. They returned to the valley to find it thriving beyond anything Lena had imagined when she'd first arrived 9 months ago. The cooperative had grown to 15-member operations. The new meeting hall hosted weekly gatherings and monthly territory-wide assemblies. 3 additional cooperatives had formed in neighboring valleys using their template. The systematic corruption that had seemed invincible was being dismantled piece by piece through documentation and organization. And at the center of it all, Caleb and Lena's ranch flourished. The cattle herd had expanded significantly. The specialized labor system had increased efficiency exactly as projected. The financial margins Lena had improved in those first desperate weeks had stabilized into genuine prosperity. But more than economic success, the ranch had become home in ways Lena had never experienced. It wasn't just land she managed or business she organized. It was a place where she belonged absolutely, where her past and present and future aligned into coherent whole. On a warm June evening, 6 months after the wedding and 9 months after her arrival, Lena stood on the ridge overlooking the valley and took inventory of everything that had changed. The pond shimmering in evening light, the rebuilt Murphy barn, the new families settling into the valley, the meeting hall where democracy and mutual aid flourished. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in September, widowed, angry, running from grief while pretending to choose new future. That woman had been broken in ways she'd barely acknowledged, lost in ways she couldn't articulate, desperate in ways she'd hidden behind competence and cold efficiency. This woman, standing on this ridge, part of this community, married to this man, was different. Not unbroken, but healed. Not lost, but found. Not desperate, but hopeful. Caleb found her there as the sun touched the western peaks, wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulled her back against his chest. What are you thinking about? How much has changed? How different everything is from what I expected when I answered your advertisement. Better or worse than expected? Impossible to compare. I expected survival arrangement. Got revolution instead. Expected temporary refuge. Got permanent home. Expected practical partnership. Got love. She turned in his arms to face him. I expected to evaluate whether I could tolerate this life for 1 month. Instead, I can't imagine any other life. No regrets? About coming here? About staying? About fighting hail and organizing the cooperative and transforming into person I didn't know I could be? She smiled. No regrets. Only gratitude that you placed that advertisement, that I was desperate and angry and bold enough to answer it, that we both chose courage over fear. We built something remarkable together, Caleb said quietly. Not just the cooperative or the anti-corruption systems. Us. This partnership. This love that grew from crisis and adversity into something unshakable. Think we can handle peace, Whites? Lena asked, only half joking. We've been fighting so long, I'm not sure I know how to just live normally. Then we'll learn together. Figure out what normal looks like when you're not constantly defending against threats. Build something beautiful instead of just protecting what exists. They stood together watching the sun set over their valley, their land, their future. Behind them, lights came on in houses and barns throughout the valley, their community, their family, their hard-won peace. The war was over. Hale was in prison. The cooperative thrived. The systematic changes they'd fought for were now territorial law. And somehow, impossibly, they'd survived it all with hearts intact and love forged stronger by shared adversity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cooperatives to organize, systems to refine, the constant work of building just society from corrupt foundations. But tonight was for celebration, for gratitude, for acknowledging that they'd done the impossible, and emerged not just alive but victorious. Lena leaned back against Caleb's solid warmth and let herself feel it fully. The peace, the love, the belonging, the hope. Let herself believe that the future they'd fought for was actually real, actually possible, actually theirs. She'd come to this valley expecting survival. She'd found transformation instead. She'd answered an advertisement for practical partnership. She'd found love and purpose and home instead. She'd been a widow running from grief, a bookkeeper with skills but no direction, a woman shaped by her father's death and her own loss. She'd become a revolutionary who transformed victims into victors, a leader who built systems that would outlast her, a woman who'd found herself by losing everything and choosing to build again. The valley spread below them in the gathering dusk, peaceful and productive and full of promise. This was what they'd fought for, not just survival, but thriving. Not just defeating Hale, but creating something better in corruption's place. Not just winning, but building victory so complete that it transformed everything. And standing there with Caleb's arms around her and their future stretching limitless ahead, Lena finally understood what her father had been fighting for all those years. Not just better wages or working conditions or union rights. He'd been fighting for dignity, for the right of ordinary people to stand against power and win, for the possibility that justice and courage could actually defeat corruption. He'd lost that fight. But Lena had won it. For him, for herself, for every person who'd ever been crushed by systematic oppression and told they were powerless to fight back. She'd proven they weren't powerless. She'd proven that documentation and organization and stubborn refusal to surrender could actually work. She'd proven that love and courage and intelligence could build futures from ashes, and that was legacy worth building on. Foundation worth defending, future worth fighting for. Together they turned from the ridge and walked back toward the ranch house where their community waited, where celebration and planning and ordinary life blended into something extraordinary, where broken people had become family, where crisis had forged unbreakable bonds, where love had grown from partnership into something fierce and permanent and absolutely unshakable. The stagecoach that brought Lena to this valley 9 months ago had carried a woman running from grief. The woman who walked into that ranch house now carried hope instead, carried purpose, carried love, carried proof that even in the harshest land imaginable, even against impossible odds, courage and intelligence, an absolute refusal to accept defeat could rewrite the rules entirely. She was home. Finally, completely, permanently home. And the future they'd fought for was just beginning.